Greetings, this is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I have drifted into the underworld. The Star Wars underworld. I have a bad feeling about this.
Here we go. We must go to the lower levels. The underworld.
You've taken your first step into a larger world.
You're after something.
Ben.
Since I've started the underworld, I've met so many great friends.
Chris.
I grew up in the 1990s, and mall packaging is nostalgic for me.
Dominic.
What I love most about Star Wars is that it's fun and it's all-round good times.
So, this is where the fun begins.
May the Force be with us.
This thing really moves!
Whoa! I like this!
I can't believe you came all this way to see me.
What's up, Star Wars fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Star Wars Underworld podcast. We are your source for the latest breaking Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion each and every week. And on this show, we're going to be talking about the 5th episode of Star Wars Andor, The Axe Forgets. But we've not forgotten the episode, and we have a lot of thoughts on it. We have a awesome panel tonight. My name is Chris, and joining me is my good friend, Mr. Dominic Jones.
Hello, Chris. Hello, Ben. Hello, Hannah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, very excited to talk about this episode of Andor, and I really love the title of it. It feels like a Game of Thrones kind of title, and it feels appropriate for this show. But I want to kick off this episode by giving a shout out to my friend Michelle, because Michelle's somebody that I work with, but she also has another gig as a travel agent, which means she gets to do things like go to Disney World and call it work. And she was going a couple of weeks ago, and she says to me, "Oh, I'm going to Disney World. I'm going to be at Galaxy's Edge. Do you want me to get you anything?" I'm like, I've been to Galaxy's Edge a couple times this year. I'm good. But if you find yourself in the cantina, can you grab a couple of the coasters for me? Because I'm trying to get a complete set of the coasters. And she goes, "Yeah, sure. I'll see what I can do." Now, Michelle is not somebody who does things by half measures. So when I next saw her after her trip, she brought me not just a couple of coasters like I was thinking, but 2 complete sets of coasters.
Hey.
Wow. And so I just feel I have to give a shout out to my friend for doing that for me. Apparently you can just ask for them. Here I've been trying to sneakily gather them for 3 years. And she just went up to the guy at the bar and was like, "Hey, can I get a set of the coasters?" He's like, "Take 2." But I wanted to give a shout out to Michelle, and I'll shout out her travel agency as well. She works at Adventure Away Travel. You can find her on Facebook, Michelle Cayuette at Adventure Away Travel Co. And if you're going to Disney or anywhere in the world, why not book through my friend? So shout out, Michelle. Thank you for the coasters, and cannot wait to talk about Andor this week. It's going to be a great show, and I will be pouring several drinks during it so that I can use all of these.
Awesome. It's going to be a very lit show at the end. I can't wait. Also joining us is the founder of the Star Wars Underworld, Ben Hart, the Star Wars guy.
How's it going, everybody? Yeah, we got an eventful episode of Andor, but also not as eventful as maybe we wanted it to be. But I'm gonna make the argument. This is still some of the best damn Star Wars I've seen in quite some time. I can't wait to get into it.
Heck yes. Also joining us from the Raeside, it's Hannah.
G'day there. It is good to be back after a bit of a break last week. I was on holiday. But yeah, very excited to talk Andor. There's so much coming up ahead of us, but I do have some contrasting thoughts of this episode, of episode 5, which I'm very open to be persuaded on. But yes, I have some not as enthused thoughts of this episode. So it's going to be very interesting, but just as keen to be here. So yeah, happy to get into it.
When you said, Hannah, in our group chat that it was going to be an interesting podcast episode, I had not seen the episode yet, and I was assuming you were referring to something just absolutely intense happening in the episode, and so that set me up for that.
Oh no, maybe.
And then almost kind of like by contagion, made me feel probably the same way that you did.
Oh no! Oh no! I do want to influence.
But then I sorted it all out.
This is why I'm terrified to talk about any episode with somebody before they've seen it, because I'm afraid of just nudging them in either direction. Them thinking it's going to be terrible and then not wanting to watch, or them thinking it's going to be great and then and then watching it and having it just be okay. I'm terrified. It terrifies me.
The word "interesting" is a very ambiguous word. I feel it could be interesting bad, interesting good.
Yeah, you know? I was thinking, just like scandalously interesting. And that's why I'm like, what happens in this episode that we're gonna have fun talking about?
It's also how you present the interesting, obviously in text form. You can just be like, that episode was interesting, and then you like that episode was ... interesting. What does that mean?
Yes, that's right. So, in order to settle the debate that apparently we're about to have about how interesting this episode was and what type of interesting it was, we have a special guest joining us, and you know him from many previous podcasts and one very fantastic live show that we recently did. It's Den from F105 Music.
Hey.
Woo.
Yeah.
What a cool guy. That was the coolest. Hey.
It's just it's all the medication for my cold and the fact that I can't talk. No, I could talk. We're good. I'm really excited to talk about the Axe Forgets, subtitled The Sopranos in Space / Mon Mothma and her hubby go for a cab ride. Turn right. I think it's actually a work of genius, this whole show. Actually, I think it's clear that Tony Gilroy's a genius. Yeah, that's what I think.
This is going to be an interesting discussion.
I don't think this show is going to capture all the mainstream audience, but it's opening up Star Wars to hit a lot of a much bigger audience. Yeah, and go different places.
Sure. For sure. So we're going to get right into it in just a few seconds. But first, we just want to remind everybody to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching us on YouTube, or leave a review if you're listening to us on a podcast app. You can reach out to us with feedback, or if you want any thoughts right on the show at swunderworld@gmail.com. We have a Discord that you can bug Ben. There we go.
I mean, either works.
Begging also works.
I was going to say beg Bun, and I'm like, wait a minute.
Please.
You can beg Ben and bug Ben for the link to the Discord on his social media, or our social media, and that is where you get the exclusive content for the time being. We're taking a step away from our previous service that we used because of some issues with them. So we now are encouraging people to join our Discord, and that's where we have our community, and that's where you can get access to any exclusive content that we are putting out, including the pre-shows for the time being. And if you want to still support us financially, though, the Discord is completely free. But if you want to support us, two ways to do that are to become a channel member over on YouTube, or super chat during our live streams if you're able to watch us live. All right, let's get into it.
Yes, let's get into it. We are, of course, talking about Andor Season 1, Episode 5, The Axe Forgets, written by Dan Gilroy and directed by Susanna White. So we'll go around the table, give our initial impressions of the episode. And Ben, as always, we'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, and I will fully admit, I am someone with an extremely short attention span. Someone who can get very bored very easily, even watching Star Wars. And I've seen a lot of takes online about this is boring. There's nothing happening. And look, I get it. I honestly get it. And I see a lot of people dunking on these people. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. This is not going to be for everybody. We're going to have some differing opinions on this show. I just know it. So, chill out. Let people dislike things if they want to. I will just caution you that maybe stop here. Don't continue to watch it and hate on it. That's just kind of unhealthy. But I feel like I am set up to be the one to being like, I don't like this. this is dead bored. But I'm not. I am so enthused about this show, even though this was a setup episode. This was an episode that was an in-between episode, much like it was basically what I expected, which is probably kind of why I guess enjoyed it, because I kind of knew what to expect. But going this was like a mirror image of the episode 2, which was also kind of an in-between, not a lot happening, but also preparing for what's coming in the next episode. So it's very easy to okay, well, a lot happened in this episode, but a lot didn't happen, and stuff that I didn't see the heist, didn't get what I wanted in this episode, but it's coming next week, so I'm okay with that. But I am someone, I have the unfair advantage of being someone who is fascinated by this universe, and there's so much more world building in this episode. There's so much more just depth to all the characters, and I think we needed this episode. See, I saw the people going oh, this is skippable. It's a use the F word, filler, and I don't believe that for a second. It is an episode that is building up these characters. I feel like I know all of them way more. Even Mon Mothma, even Cassian, all of them have more depth, more to them now, more layers that I think are going to come into play in the next episode, because I'm very worried about a lot of these characters, because this is not going to go well, as in typical Star Wars fashion. It's just not going to go well. It's destined to fail. But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. The world building, just the thing, just people sitting around talking. Come on, it doesn't. I mean, the acting and the dialogue and the writing is put on full display in this episode, and it is brilliant.
Yeah, I will just jump ahead and say I agree with a lot of what you just said there. But as we know, not everybody's going to agree with us, Ben. Hannah, your thoughts on this episode?
Oh, yeah, very good. See what you did there. Well. I totally agree. I think this is a very well-written episode. I think it is really well shot. Like we just said, the dialogue was fantastic. I still have a odd feeling of dislike for this episode. There's some things, and I've spent days trying to answer it myself, but there's something about this episode in particular. So not Andor, because I'm loving the show. I've loved the show up to this point, and it's felt very Star Wars to me. But I'm finding myself having to convince myself that this show is a part of Star Wars, and it's a part of the Star Wars universe, and that's the thing. I'm not kind of opposed to it. It's instead of me trying to convince people that I'm this is a Star Wars, I'm can someone convince me this is Star Wars? I'm open to it. I'm I want to leave this podcast today to be tell me how this is Star Wars. Which I feel Din, I feel like you're going to convince me of that today, maybe. But I think it was a great episode. I think it was, like I say, really well made. But I had a very interesting initial response. I have watched it twice, and the rewatch was I enjoyed it a little more, but I just have a couple of gripes, which we'll probably get into and break down further into the show. But that's where I'm at for now.
That's fair. It's completely fair. Din, what about you? Your initial impressions of The Axe Forgets?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I'm convinced Tony Gilroy is a genius. He knows exactly what he's doing. Every square inch of the screen, every second of music, every line of dialogue, every muscle twitch on every actor's face is so exquisitely composed for a tone and for a purpose. I think this is a masterwork. I think it's going to be misunderstood. It's Star Wars because it's family issues. The Imperial guy he's basically has a Tony. It's basically an homage to The Sopranos. It's Tony Soprano and his abusive psychological mother in space. And that is Star Wars, though. Someone with a parent issue, but it's genius is kind of an art when you that's what George Lucas did. He mashed genres, and this is mashing The Sopranos with Star Wars in that scene. And the first time I was like, this is weird. I like it because I like The Sopranos. Second time I watched it just now, I was like, man, it's genius. It's like doing exactly what George Lucas would do, but for an adult HBO audience. Everything's a family issue. You got the family issues with the dysfunctional imperial family and they're never going to go anywhere because they're always going to screw each other over to get ahead. So there's a dysfunctional family that's never going to work. You have the rebels, which is the same. They have same kind of tensions because there's competitiveness and distrust and everything, but it's like the beliefs and the core root values of why they're in it that's going to glue them together and make them a family that works. And I mean, I'm really happy to be talking about this episode. Even like the same thing with Mon Mothma and her daughter. That's Star Wars, and the fact that that's another kind of Sopranos scene where it's just like there was so many scenes where they're driving around in their SUVs talking about stuff that really relates to the bigger picture, but you don't see it yet.
Yeah. All of the sort of Sopranos connections and the sort of the feeling that this is like an HBO show, but with Star Wars, it makes me think that this probably is the closest we've gotten so far to the show that George Lucas and Rick McCallum wanted to make in the late 2000s. The show that was called Star Wars Underworld, or at least that was the working title for it. I think had that show been made, it would have looked and felt and been paced a lot like this show, and would have tackled some similar themes because it was set around the same time period, would have been dealing with Imperial characters and Rebel characters and sort of underworld characters. And that's what this show is. Cassian kind of represents the underworld right now. So it's really, I'm finding this show really fulfilling in that way, because that's a show I've been kind of wanting to see ever since George started teasing it. And then, it wound up on the shelf. It wound up not being part of the Disney stuff. And this isn't that show, but it feels like it's a little bit of a glimpse into what that show might have been like had things gone a different way with, all the stuff that George wanted to do in the sort of 2008 to 2012 era.
And there's a lot of just to cap off what I was saying, because I just want to riff off what Hannah was saying. It's pure Star Wars. There's so much historical references in it. Like that kid, he's wearing the red hat that the American and French revolutionaries wore. It's and he's basically like a young Voltaire. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the two intellectual artists who were behind the French Revolution, and it's pure Star Wars. It's pure George going into history and riffing on it to say what it means, to make a comment on history and what it means to be what kind of relevant message can you say for now into the audience it's speaking to.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot, like Michael Moore was talking about that today, and people were going off on it in Twitter because he made some posts about fascism, and then he pointed out all these things that are fascist policies in the States. And it's like, there's a difference. People got upset, but there's a difference between saying those are fascist policies and this is a fascist country. And that's so George Lucas, because he's like, if you're not careful, you don't watch all those things. Like the kid said, the pace of oppression outpaces our ability to understand it. That's what's relevant in our world, and we're all watching Andor, and
so many things are happening at once that you can't keep
MCU
up.
shows, and we're devouring them and all that stuff. We're being hoodwinked while we devour all these shows. I think it's genius because it's doing what Star Wars has always done. It's pure George. It's just
without him.
Post Sopranos world style of storytelling.
I think George is watching this at home right now. He's enjoying this.
If he's watching anything Star Wars, I have a feeling this would be something he would enjoy. Although I'm worried for Manifesto Boy. I have a feeling he's not going to make it out of the next episode.
Yeah, he's a bit too happy and lovable that it's ooh.
Yeah, things are just being set up. But I hope he does. Chris, what about you? Your thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, it took until this moment to gather those thoughts, because like I could just talk about how much I love this episode, but I just want to go off of what the discussion that we've been having so far, and really the question, what is Star Wars? Okay, so there's this concept within science called a homeostatic property cluster, and what that is it's a group of things that don't have to be related at all, but often are seen together and thus create some form of identity or label. So Yes, take notes.
Dennis taking notes.
Is class in session. So, Star Wars.
Teacher, can I go to the bathroom? Teacher.
Damn it! Where's my pen?
So when you're asking the very, it is a metaphysical question, which again, taking notes within philosophy, metaphysics is not spooky stuff. It's questioning the why behind existence, essentially the meaning behind facts. So what is the meaning behind the question, what is Star Wars? Well, it's a cluster of different things that we often see together. So our view of what Star Wars is it's always changing, and it's based on the experience that we have watching certain things that are labeled Star Wars. And then we say that's Star Wars, that's Star Wars, that's Star Wars. But it's really just a group of different things that we relate together. And some of those things are like
even the original movie was. Sorry to interject.
Oh, very true. Yeah, yes, and like Den said, family issues. That's a very core George Lucas thing for Star Wars. He said Star Wars is about family issues. When asked what the sequels, his sequels would be about, he said it's the same thing. It's about family issues and the Skywalkers. And so there's that, but then there's the lightsabers, and there's the Force, and then there's the John Williams and Kevin Kiner and other great composers' music, and there's all the planets and the different factions, clone troopers. There's all these different things, but the thing that I think separates this show out is while it has a lot of those core elements, there is one thing that is almost always in Star Wars that is different. And I've finally, I think I've put in the peg on it. And that is that Star Wars is an action adventure thing. Almost everything Star Wars is in with the genre of action, adventure, fantasy, sci-fi. And this show was initially billed as a spy thriller. And of course, a spy thriller is still action adventure. This show is not a thriller, or it might be a thriller, but it's certainly not like a spy thriller action show. I want to be the first person to say, this is the first Star Wars drama. This is a drama that we're watching. It is a different genre of story than pretty much any Star Wars that has ever come before it, especially in this format of, watching a live action or animated moving picture. And I think that's why it feels, people have this feeling of, wait, there's stormtroopers and there's Imperials and there's all these Star Wars names, and that's Cassian Andor and Mon Mothma from Star Wars. But why does this feel different? I'm questioning my existence here. Well, it's because you're watching Star Wars expand into something that is beyond the homeostatic property cluster that is Star Wars. It's expanding into the drama territory. And while it includes a lot of the other elements, it's a different genre of storytelling. And so it for some people, that might not count as Star Wars. They might say all the things that define Star Wars for me, one of the core aspects of that is that action, adventure, sci-fi, fantasy type storytelling. And this is really not that. This episode was a pure drama. It was character based. It was dialogue based. You take the dialogue out of this episode, it means nothing at all. And that's not always the case with Star Wars. There was intensity to it, but not the type of action, violent intensity that you often see in Star Wars and is in almost every part of Star Wars media. I mean, the most violent thing that happened is somebody holding a knife to someone's throat. And this episode, which is still an incredibly violent thing. And in the space of dramas in that genre, that it would be considered violence, but it obviously is nothing compared to people getting limbs chopped off, which is very very much shown in Star Wars. So saying that, going to my thoughts on this episode, I feel like they're executing the genre of drama extremely well. Like you just said, Dan, Tony Gilroy being a genius for within the construct of what a drama is. And we understand it to be, I think this is a very well executed drama. And I think that, a lot of the detractors people are having with it are because of the change in genre and not the change in quality. The quality is actually really, really good. Now, this also goes backwards because there's some people that think that this show is miles better than anything else in Star Wars. There's a lot of people who think that. And the reason why is because they like dramas better. And so when they see this, they think, wow, this show, has just a, more mature theme, and there's more detail to it. And that's true, but that comes with the change in genre. It's not necessarily, you can't really apples and oranges compare it to Star Wars that isn't meant to go that deep and look at human beings under that level of a microscope to their individual motivations and things. So that's kind of my take on it. But I will say finally that this is really exciting for me because I, for one, am someone who really likes dramas. Like as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, wow, people who watch The Crown would really like this show, which is very interesting to say that I never thought I would say about Star Wars, but it really is the case. This show has the same kind of pacing and depth as The Crown, which is one of the best genres or one of the best dramas in the genre of drama ever made. So that's kind of what's going on there. So all the other specific thoughts I'll talk about as we get into specific things, but this is good for what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of it's you said action adventure is the usual genre for Star Wars. This is like action drama or drama action. Like I almost don't even know which way to put it because I feel like we're gonna tune in next week and there'll be lots of action and lots of excitement. It'll feel more like a classic Star Wars tale. But for the first 2/3 of this story of episodes 4 through 6, it's not that. It's a drama. George always said faster and more intense. It seems like Tony Gilroy has said no. Slower and more intense. And that's what we're getting through these episodes because the intensity is still there. When Buddy has his knife at Cassian's throat, like you feel the tension, you feel the intensity of that moment. But as you said, there hasn't been a shootout. There hasn't been a lightsaber duel. We had a TIE fighter buzz by them a little bit earlier, but that's the closest thing to an action scene we really get in this episode. But you're right. Like it's breaking the mold of what we usually expect from Star Wars, and it's playing with the idea of genre in a really interesting way that I hope that Star Wars can continue to do. This is what I hope for from the Disney Plus series and the movies and just the whole idea of Star Wars being more than just episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, and like Hannah and Dan, you're much more musically talented than I am. I'm mainly a consumer of music than a producer of music. However, I do recognize within music that there's definitely something to be said about pacing and building up to something. And that's very important emotionally. And I feel like this show, this was like the verse in a song. Like verses aren't meant to be punchy and catchy and to get your emotions running. It's supposed to lay that framework of understanding what the song is about and some information about the different types of chord arrangements in the space that the song exists in, whatever the musical word is for the phonetic reach of the song. And then you get to that build up of the pre-chorus and the chorus, and that's when you hit the hook. And I feel like that's what they're setting up. They're setting up a hook that most likely will be next week, where you're gonna feel it a lot more because of the verse that came before it. And I think the problem is that Star Wars has tried to do this within shows like the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels for years, and they haven't been very successful because those shows are very much action shows. And when they tried to be dramas, they didn't do very well because they weren't all in on it. They weren't just all in on being dramas. They were just action adventure shows masquerading as dramas in points. And so they never fully set it up. This show's going all the way and saying, we're going to have an episode of 40 minutes of just people talking and checking in on people's family issues over a dinner table. There are so many people talking about issues over a dinner table. And because they went all in on it, I believe that it's going to create that emotional crescendo really, really well when they get back to the action, because it's going to make it so much more intense, because you'll have these moments of whenever action is happening to a specific character, you'll have all this backstory for who they are. You'll relate to it and empathize with it a lot more than if you were just introduced to them, given a few lines about what the motivations are and what they are. And so I see what they're doing in this episode, setting that up. And I think that this is one of the first times I've seen them do a setup episode in a way that was not disappointing for me, because it was set up really well and they went all in on it, instead of like saying, okay, we're going to do a setup episode, but there still needs to be this moment where there's some action. So we're going to take like 5 or 10 minutes away from the setup just to have some type of plot so that the action adventure people have their fix in the show. That's what I feel like Star Wars has done up until this point. Here they're like, screw the fix. We're just going to have 40 minutes of talking, setting up these characters, getting us into the situation and preparing us for when that action comes back in to the story.
Yeah, perhaps the closest we've ever gotten to something like this are certain episodes of the Clone Wars, where, those old political episodes that we all hated back in the day because it was just a bunch of people sitting around talking. Where's the explosions? All this
Heroes
kind of
on
stuff.
both. I always want to say Heroes on Both Sides is an iconic episode.
It's really
it
great. Some of them were
absolutely
better
is.
than others. Yeah.
But there was always, but even that episode, you have all this great, exposition about the separatists and all this kind of stuff. And you go and see Mina Bonteri and Lux and all this kind of stuff. You got some great back and forth between Mina and Padme and Lux and Ahsoka, and you're great. And still, it ends with an action sequence. It ends with the Senate, the power grid getting attacked. And they always manage to slip in that little action sequence near the end or something where, there's action and stuff like that. So, the Clone Wars was a show, obviously, for a different audience. Now they're just like going all in on this and saying, like, you're not going to get any action in this thing. You're going to get a TIE fighter flying by. That's it. That's all the action you're getting.
And that makes it the subtlety of that, makes it kind of more powerful. Because if you're in an action adventure show, just like, a TIE fighter is just, you're not really going to think twice. Like whenever
you never feel it. You never feel it. You could put 40,000 of on screen in Rise of Skywalker.
Exactly.
And you don't feel it.
It's about that perspectivism. And again, like that's a very George Lucas thing. That's one of the reasons why A New Hope had this quality to it that people just weren't expecting from science fiction or fantasy, because they didn't fully understand that perspectivism. George Lucas understood it because that first shot is a perspective shot. It's not this wide shot of, okay, here's the Star Destroyer chasing the Tantive 4, which is, what many filmmakers would do. No, George Lucas put the camera like you're a person floating through space. You're a little tiny person. How would it look like from your perspective as a little tiny person? The thing massively coming overhead, and you see how big it is, and it just keeps coming and coming, and it's a triangle, and it gets wider and wider. And you're like, how wide is this thing? How long is this thing? And then finally, you see the back of the Star Destroyer, and that's the moment when you ask, so many people, why are you a Star Wars fan? The most common answer I hear is, I was sitting in a theater in 1977 and I saw that Star Destroyer go overhead, and I knew from that moment on that this was going to be my thing. Like, that the TIE fighter going over their heads and whizzing by like that with that amount of force, and then them, putting their hands over their ears to protect their ears, and then you see all the grass and the wind, like that's that same level of perspectivism that George Lucas lent to that opening shot. That was the hook that got people into Star Wars in the first place, and it's something that's been missing in a lot of Star Wars, even action Star Wars. When you do little action, you can focus on it being done very well, and that's what this show does.
Oh yeah, we talked about this a bit last week, and Matthew Hart is making this point again in the chat. But like, most of the time when you see a TIE fighter in Star Wars, you think, oh yeah, no biggie. The X-Wing will shoot it down. The Millennium Falcon will shoot it down. We'll be fine. The Ghost will shoot it down. We'll be fine. All good. In these last two episodes, there have been two moments where, TIE fighters have flown by, and you feel how terrifying a machine this is, and you feel how overwhelming the Empire can be to everyday people. Because, when you're 5 people with nothing but a couple of blasters on hands, that ship can end all of you in less time than, it would I don't know what less time than what, but it would
just
it
less
would be
time than usual.
Faster
less
than
time
you
than
can pull
usual.
the ears off of Gundark.
There you
It
go.
continues that sense of scale that Rogue One set up. That Rogue One was all about, oh, you've seen a Star Destroyer before. You've never seen it floating above a city. You've never looked up at a Star Destroyer and seen how massive it is. And this is, a TIE fighter. Even at that point, we've seen thousands of them in Return of the Jedi. Like, we've seen TIE fighters in mass so many times. But what's that like to be just a person standing on the ground watching one fly by? That is freaking terrifying, because it is terrifying, because it is a threat. And that's the whole sense of, and that just goes up from there in regards to what they're facing, the symbolism of the Empire, how powerful the Empire is. This one TIE fighter could take all those guys out and, not break a sweat.
And here's the thing this is what the balance that is struck in this show that is so shockingly incredible is the Gilroys and Susanna White and all the people involved in this. They have a healthy irreverence to certain aspects of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. Like, they don't have, all of the fan service that's in a lot of other Star Wars. They don't go for that nostalgia hook like they often go for in Star Wars projects of, let's make you think of your childhood, and that's why you'll think this is good. They don't have that, they don't have that marriage to a certain action genre pacing that faster and more intense. They're irreverent to that, but somehow, despite wanting to make this show exist beyond Star Wars and be a good show outside of Star Wars, and to someone who doesn't really know much about Star Wars or doesn't even care for the genre that Star Wars usually is, they get the little moments, the nuances of the Star Wars universe excruciatingly well, and they use everything very, very deftly. Like, for example, like, if you're someone who really doesn't give a crap about Star Wars and you're told, well, the ships in Star Wars, they look like this, you could probably shoot that same scene. But what you're not going to know to do is how important it is to make it sound like it did. Because TIE fighters as a character is not what they look like. It's what they sound like. You have a more visceral feeling hearing the sound of a TIE fighter than actually seeing a TIE fighter, because that was set up by George Lucas and Ben Burtt in A New Hope. A very specific, unique sound that there's nothing else in the world that sounds exactly like a TIE fighter. And it's just it's associated with that level of menace and fear and danger. And what happens in this episode is you don't see it right away. You hear it. You hear that sound. You know what it is. And that is playing within the Star Wars universe by the rules in a way that adds to it rather than detracts from what you're doing, which is absolutely brilliant. And I haven't seen that level of discernment in most Star Wars projects. Most Star Wars projects, it's just like, we take this out, we put this in. There's not that meaning behind it, but it goes to what you said earlier, Din, which is every single sound you hear, every single shot, every single expression on someone's face, everything is thought out meticulously. There's nothing in this show that seems random or just there to be there to fill screen time.
Mm-hmm. Hannah, you presented yourself as kind of the skeptic of all of us about this show, and you kind of need the most convincing. What are your thoughts on what we've been talking about here and the way the show is constructed?
I think, here's the tricky thing, because my discontent with this episode, I think, is solely down to preference and what genres and what media that interests me personally. So I think that's why even online I was very I hesitant to be like this, or I didn't like this episode, because I don't think I can say that, because I think it's a good episode. It's just I'm not someone to watch that spy thriller, to watch that Blade Runner kind of show or movie or genre. So I think it's just there's something. And again, I can't put my finger on it that I just can't connect with yet. But, when we talk about these individual things, there's still actually a bunch in this episode I still really liked and found very interesting. There was some really key dialogue that I think did really good building. I think the kind of this hesitancy maybe I'm kind of holding about it is I felt like there wasn't enough of that key dialogue. Like there was key dialogue, but I felt like it wasn't enough. So I feel like I'm contrasting to what you just said there a little bit, Chris, of just saying how like every moment like we're building something. I found a lot of this episode. I was like, we could have cut that out. We could have cut that. Like I felt like I didn't need to see this, which oddly I don't think a lot of in Star Wars, if ever. But I really found that in this episode where I was like, I feel like that didn't enrich my knowledge of Cassian, these characters, or the story at all. Which is rough. I feel rough saying because I really don't say it about Star Wars often. And I'm the first to say that I really love when Star Wars is subtle. And I really love, because like I said just before, I'm actually not a super big action big movie kind of person, so I actually really love the subtle stuff, and I think there's been the most beautiful moments of Star Wars has been like subtle or like one line of dialogue that's been delivered and it's a moment and emotion captured into something. But I found that a little bit lacking for me. Again, this is what I mean. It's like I know this is only my perspective, where it's like for my perspective I couldn't latch on to maybe I'll say about 50% of the dialogue I couldn't latch on to have emotional meaning for me. To be like, oh, that helped me understand something.
It's buried. It's buried pretty deep. This show operates on a very subconscious level. And again, that's not to say that it's inappropriate to have no connection to it, because at a certain level, the way you relate to media, it's a relationship that exists between you and the media, and that is extremely relevant. So, like, if it's not hitting somebody, it's not hitting somebody, and it's no one's fault. That's just the way that it is. And so, I feel like I understand it a little bit because it's just, I don't know, my brain is just set up to pick up on the subconscious subtext that's being laid, but I don't want to make that sound like I'm experiencing it like at a higher plane than you are, because I don't want to diminish your experience.
That's what I've actually been thinking. I'm like, am I not catching things like that are really deeply intellectual? Like, it sounds so dramatic, but I'm like, am I too simple-minded? But I know that's not the case, but like, that's the question.
No. I think there's definitely places on the internet that will tell you that. But I would caution away from that. I've seen some comments.
Like,
they're stupid. They don't understand it.
Like I again, it's like I don't.
Jesus, man.
People, brains do.
That's what I said.
Brains do change over time. And again, I'm not saying that the future Hannah will all of a sudden be like, oh, I get this now. Like, I'm not saying that that's the case. It might just be something that just does not connect with you, and that's completely fine. And it's not going to connect with everybody. That's impossible. There's always going to be someone out there who it doesn't connect with. But I will say that brains change. For example, the first time that I watched Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I was probably like 15. I literally told people for 2 years it was the worst film I'd ever seen because I couldn't understand the subtext of the film. I looked at it for just what the plot of the film was, and I'm like, wow, the plot of this film is really dumb. It's incredibly stupid and just zany, and like, who had this idea and why is it a movie? And I was really confused as to why it was even made, that the book was adapted or the book was even written. I was confused for years when I was a teenager. And then when I watched it again in my 20s, I all of a sudden understood that the film wasn't about the plot. That the film was about the characters, and it was about symbolism for humanity, and it was about metaphors, and it was about sarcasm, and kind of that almost like you mentioned Voltaire earlier, Den, like a Voltaire like take on our universe, that satirical take on our universe and where people get meaning from. And then I'm like, okay, this is actually a really well constructed meaning, and I could actually feel the movie. I could feel the movie emotionally watching it, 7-8 years after my initial viewing. And I went from thinking it was one of the worst, most confusing, most pointless things I'd ever seen, to, oh, this is actually pretty good. And I see why a lot of people, reference this and say it's something that they enjoy and they're a fan of both the book and the film. And so that's happened to me with many, many things. It's happened to me with music. I've heard certain artists when I was younger and been like, this is weird. Why do people listen to this? And then I listened to it again 10 years and I'm like, oh, this is actually really good. I see what they're doing here and there. And I have a different kind of perspective
Country
on it.
music.
So yeah, so perspective.
So maybe in 10 years from now, you'll like this episode, maybe.
But again, it's like, but there's some things that I've never connected to. And I don't know if I ever will. I don't know if I'll ever be a fan of hip hop. Like, it's just not a genre I've ever connected to. It's really popular and there are a lot of great artists and I understand what they're doing, but like, it's just something that whenever I listen to it, I don't have an emotional connection to it. It doesn't speak to me in the way that other genres of music, like, rock and pop do.
I have a metaphor. I feel like my experience right now is, when you're like 10 years old and you have a sip of like your mum or dad's like coffee for the first time. Like, you want a sip? And I'm like, oh yeah, I want to taste this. Like, you drink it all the time, it'll be good. And your taste buds aren't developed yet. They're not fully at their operational state. So it tastes even though it is bitter, but it's extremely bitter to a disgusting level. And you're like, oh God, what the hell is that? That's awful.
Yeah.
But then
well,
obviously
you should have tried an Americano in Europe. They're very smooth.
But yeah, well then, because when you're older and you're developed, and I would say most adults now love coffee, love the taste of coffee, like, and it's not that bitter, it's not that grotesque bitter flavor, even though it is. It's like you can handle it, and you're like, oh yeah, this is good. I feel like maybe that's a bit of my experience right now of. Like, I don't know if it's like specifically I'm too young for Andor. It's just, I think it's like a taste bud thing. I think my taste buds just aren't just don't favor this.
I will just say, can I just say add on here real quick? Some people never like coffee. And that's fine. Like, it's totally fair.
And that's fine too.
This is what I'm saying. I just want to add is that it's totally fair to say, you know what? Andor's not for me. I can appreciate it the way, I appreciate great art, but just it's not my favorite thing to look at. So I'm going to look at something else most of the time.
And I know, for example, talking about beverages, one that's a little too old for some of the younglings here, a little too young for, but like, the beer beverages, for example, like a lot of people are connoisseurs of beer. And they love tasting different nuances between the micro brews and like all those things. Yeah. And it's like, for me, it just all tastes terrible to me. It all tastes just like sour and bitter and gross to me, because I don't like fermented things. I don't like kombucha. I don't like vinegar, anything like that. It's just, I'm not a fan of. And so like, I feel that way. I don't think I will ever get to a point in my life when I'll be like, oh, I appreciate this brew here. Like, I don't think that's me. I'm not like that with wine either. Same thing. But coffee, I like coffee now, and probably better than I did when I was younger. So that one has changed. So I don't know. But here's the thing: is all this time, Star Wars. I've always felt like Star Wars has been missing something. And the thing is, I'm a huge fan of dramas. I'm a huge fan of the slow-paced stuff that has a lot of subtext to it. And I feel like a lot of times Star Wars moves too fast for that. And so while I am a huge Star Wars fan, and I love Star Wars just as much as any Star Wars fan, I do acknowledge the fact that for me, a lot of it is nostalgia and what would the word be? Me being conditioned to kind of have emotional responses to certain things over time, and that energy of the community. And I don't think that someone who is a modern Star Wars fan, who is brought into Star Wars through Clone Wars and through the prequels and through the sequels, I don't really know if they really like Star Wars for the same reasons that I do, or if their idea of what a good, perfect story is the same as mine. Like, I think that Star Wars has moved into a certain spot over time where it's kind of become a certain thing where it's this very specific genre of action adventure that has very specific beats and pacing to it that oftentimes, you know, is very cookie cutter in some of those ways. Like, we have to construct the acts like this. We have to make sure that there's this one moment here. We have to make sure that the last 5 minutes have this in it. Like, there's this very specific recipe to Star Wars. And I feel like a lot of people now, they like Star Wars for that recipe. And I saw that recipe kind of happen over time, way after I became a fan of Star Wars. I saw it kind of develop from itself out of something that was a bunch of random stuff. I felt like when George Lucas was working on it, there wasn't a recipe. I don't feel like George Lucas had a recipe for Star Wars. I felt like it was just what he wanted to make. Now I think there's a
displacement is art, and that's why George used technology and never repeated himself. Because actually, like your brain, I've read a lot about this. Your brain, the synapses, when they become habitual, they go in the same direction. So that's kind of what happens with art. And if you throw in something that displaces, like, we have this part of our brain. So we were walking through the same path in the forest all the time when we're hunters and gatherers. And when a bear walks into the path, it's displaced and it turns on all your senses and you go, shit. Sorry. Wait, it's
a Star Wars word now.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you're good now.
Oh my
So
God.
I'm not breaking out the bleep button.
You have a biological function to go, there's something different. I'm alert. Pay attention. Survive. So actually, George Lucas talked about this, that one of the reasons why he used technology is he even said, you're telling the same story that's always been told. So if you show something new, it kind of actually and do something new with what and different from what people are expecting. It's like the bear in the path, and your senses wake up and you pay attention.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say, this is a very difficult thought for me to get across, but what I'm trying to say is that Star Wars is it's kind of existing in a lane. It's found a lane for itself within storytelling, and people who have stuck with it and consume it, they like it for that lane. A lot of them like it for the lane that it's in and like it for certain moments and certain beats. And I think that's why, like, the Mandalorian and Kenobi are so popular, because they're very much within the lane that is Star Wars. Like, you look at that, you know, moment with Hayden and Ewan, many moments of them actually, but those climactic moments in Kenobi, you look at that moment with Luke Skywalker, you know, and the Mandalorian, like, those are within the Star Wars lane big time. And that's why I think a lot of people who like Star Wars love those things, because that's why they like Star Wars. For me, I saw that constructed later. I'm not necessarily a fan of Star Wars per se. I'm a fan of good storytelling. I like movies. My like of movies and my like of television is transcendent of my like of Star Wars. That's why I don't read Star Wars books very often, because I am a fan of movies and television before I'm a fan of Star Wars. And so when I see Andor, I'm comparing it not to Star Wars, and I'm not comparing it against the Star Wars lane, because I don't actually like the Star Wars lane. I just like good storytelling. And when I see Andor, I'm like, this is a really good drama. This is like The Crown, but in the Star Wars universe. This is really awesome. And I'm comparing it to, you know, what I like in that form of media, as opposed to, you know, what I like about Star Wars specifically. So that's my best way to kind of like say that, like, you can be a Star Wars fan and think this show doesn't really fit within Star Wars, and it's okay to not like it because it's not in the Star Wars lane per se. And if you're a fan of the Star Wars lane, then it makes sense that this would seem apocryphal to you. Just like for me, Star Wars on a piece of paper is not Star Wars because to me, the only thing I connect with is the film and the TV. It's very, very hard for me to read it and have it become Star Wars to me, just as it might be hard for people who have a certain idea of what Star Wars on camera storytelling is to see something that's a different genre and have it be Star Wars to them. Like that makes perfect sense to me, and I think that's okay. And it's not
but it's also not just okay, it's actually what Star Wars was from the get-go. Empire Strikes Back was not in the Star Wars lane. You know,
and Star Wars
and people
overall,
didn't like that, and people didn't like that, and some people
we have to
really
remember
trashed it. And the prequels were never in the Star Wars lane, and each one of those was different. And then the Clone War, every Clone Wars episode wasn't in the Star Wars
were.
lane.
Think about how controversial, quote unquote, Ewoks were. Like that's not in the Star Wars lane. Like, George always broke out of it. Yeah.
My only critique about this show is the visual lane, but no one is really like. There was only one Picasso. You know, there's only one Lucas. Like, I can't. Like, I'm a little tired of the forest and snow and sand lanes. Like, that's my one critique of this show. But
we were hanging out last night, and we were talking about this a little bit. And our friend Matthew from Ion Cannon said, "Yeah, but you know, this time the forest is hilly, so that's different." so we got that. We got that going for it.
I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of think about, you know, this is what I was saying off the top is I want Star Wars to feel like everything can be a little bit different, and everything can be a different genre, can be a different story. It doesn't always have to be the same thing. And you know, I like the Star Wars lane. So a lot of the times the stuff that comes out in the Star Wars lane, I'm very happy with it. You know, love Mandalorian for that reason. Love Obi-Wan Kenobi. But I love it when we break out of the lane. And this show did that. Last Jedi did that. And, you know, as we just laid out, George did that all the time. And so the idea is that I want Star Wars to be multiple lanes.
Yes. I agree with that.
Like Coruscant, they're all crossing over.
Let's take the expressway.
They're all flowing.
Yeah.
They're all
And see,
going.
I would argue
directions.
that one of the reasons Star Wars has literally become one of the most popular things to ever exist in humanity is because it has always been made up of varying things, varying genres of things, whether it's, you know, break it down to westerns or war films or spy thrillers. You could argue a lot of that probably stems back to the original films, and all that's in there. But some of the series, even going back to Clone Wars, started to strip away parts of that and go like, okay, we're going to focus on one genre. And when that happens, a certain amount of people are going to check out and go, I like Star Wars because it's a Western. Andor doesn't really feel like a Western to me, so I'm not going to be feeling this as much. Or it's, you know, samurai films or whatever. There's so many things that Star Wars is, going back to A New Hope, that Andor is magnifying a portion of this, and it's going to work for some people. It's not going to work for other people, and that's okay. That's fine. It's great that, you know, that I think it's great that I'm seeing literally just scrolling down my Facebook or Twitter feed. I'm seeing people going like, this is boring, this sucks, and other people going like, this is the best Star Wars ever. And I'm like, that's incredible. Like that's amazing that, you know, we have such, you know, because as we said before, it would be really boring if we all agreed on this.
It's interesting that metaphor that we're using about the lanes, that Mon Mothma and her husband. Oh, that I gotta say, I really love the tone and texture when they do the Coruscant scenes. Oh, yeah. They're so Attack of the Clones.
That night scene, man.
Oh,
the sound and the ambiance is very Attack of the Clones. It's wonderful, and but they actually changed lanes.
Yeah.
There's a funny but the thing is, that's the first thing I mentioned about the show. Is Sopranos in space, and Mon Mothma and her hubby are in a taxi, and they turn left, and they go into that like. But I actually think that's like I was saying, everything is by design. Like I literally think there's something they're saying and we haven't seen it yet, but they changed the
This
lane.
is not.
They changed the lane for some sort of brilliant purpose.
This is not. Yeah, this is not like the Tarantino take on dialogue, because there's a lot of dialogue, and I can see how it could be seen as unnecessary. And there's a lot of mundane things, an incredible amount of just everyday things that are just usually too trivial to be in the grand thing that is Star Wars. I mean, 2 scenes with someone eating cereal in the same episode. Of course,
I want some of that.
Of
That
course,
was my biggest gripe.
but here's the thing about that is that, you know, I don't think it's like the Tarantino style. Like what Quentin Tarantino does with all the randomness is he does it to add kind of like a texture. Like it's just there. It's like a Pollock painting, talking about Picasso and paintings, where it's just like all over the place. There's your texture. There's no reason why that little drop of paint is over there in that corner.
No,
you
you're
just
right.
threw
That's
it and
a
it
good
was
analogy.
there. And then when you look at the whole thing, okay, then it makes sense. Like that's what the dialogue writing of Tarantino is when you're watching, you know, his films like Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, all of his films. There's just people talking about random things. There's no reason why they need to talk about what a Big Mac is, what a quarter pounder is called in France. There's no reason
Royale with
to bring that.
cheese.
There's no plot, deeper subtextual reason to be talking about Royale with cheese. It's just texture to the movie that, and when you look at the whole thing together, it's like, okay, this is a slice of life movie where it just adds to the realism and the immersion of it.
And that's in contrast to previous Star Wars previously, where everything is adding something to the plot or whatever.
Yeah.
Every piece of dialogue is like Chekhov's gun of like, this is going to pay off somewhere.
But I will argue, as Din was
But this
saying,
is about character. Every piece is adding
I
to
will
the
be. I will
characters.
argue that that's not what's going on here. Yes, it's a lot of dialogue. Yes, it's a lot of trivialness and randomness that we don't usually see. But it's not just to provide this overlying texture of realism. It's like, you know, characters aren't just eating cereal to be eating cereal. Like they are showing a deep emotional, motivational thing. Like, you know, when there's going to be a point when Cyril is going to probably be facing off against Cassian Andor, and you're going to normally you're just like, oh, here's a bad guy, the good guy has to defeat him. And then that's like Star Wars. It's like, oh, here's a boss you have to defeat. It's very video game like, and it's fun to watch the fight, but it's like playing a video game. There's not as much emotional subtext to it. Now, when they face off, you're going to be like,
but Return of the Jedi was not a video game ending. That's why it was so brilliant.
No. And so, and for other reasons. So, but again, when we get to that point, when those two face off, because that's what they're setting up, because you have him looking at the hologram of Cassian at the end of his scenes in this episode, is you're going to remember, okay, this guy was pounded into the depths of depression by something that Cassian Andor was related to the point that he is picking wet pieces of cereal out of his bowl and staring at it. That was the point of that scene. They were showing how depressed and just out of it he is, and how he's been emotionally affected by that situation. And that's going to become his motivation. So when you see him lock eyes with Cassian, you're going to see something behind that eyes. And that's the guy that was just walked all over by his mom in her apartment.
Yeah. He that's that moment where he's looking at Cassian. That's him looking at who he blames for everything that has gone wrong in his life. This is a guy who was a true believer in whatever his cause was, you know, being security. Maybe he had aspirations of rising through the ranks and being some kind of imperial, you know, this was somebody and somebody who was well on their path, and was everything that they were doing was to be on that path. And then they came face to face with Cassian, quite literally in the 3rd episode. And ever since that happened, their life has gone to shit, to use that Star Wars word again. And now he's, like you said, he's depressed. He's looking at the wet cereal. His mother is telling him, we're gonna call Uncle Harlow, and we're gonna, tell him all about how terrible your life has become. Yeah, I want to meet Uncle Harlow. That's who I hope shows up next week.
Yeah. I don't know what to do with you.
Yeah, I don't need.
Character. I actually like that character.
Yeah.
He's cool, Mom.
Yeah, I don't need Sly Moore or Saw Gerrera, anybody. I just want Uncle Harlow.
It kind of sets this episode, the tone of his character, which is just like he's not going to look at himself. He's not going to look in the mirror and go, "What have I done?" or "What can I do to fix myself?" He's going to continue down the path of self-destruction, the path towards blaming someone else for his problems.
I don't think so, though. I think he's actually I think what we're seeing is him looking in the mirror, because I guess I'm just comparing. This is so obviously Sopranos. Have you all watched The Sopranos? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is lifted. All this style, it's just lifted right out of The Sopranos with Tony and his mom, and then he goes to therapy and he starts to understand that he's a mirror. A lot of what he does is a result of his mom, and the problem is, even after he understands that, he still sometimes makes really wrong choices. So I actually think in that scene, he's. You guys talked about that he could be the Agent Callus or something on one of your last, and now I'm starting to see why, because I think that scene of him was set up like almost like a mirror. He's looking at his mom and going, "Oh, right, that's why I got to do something different." And I think he's gonna. Yeah.
See, I came out of that scene at the end with him looking at the hologram. I think there's a possibility that we hit a redemption arc with this character of some kind. I also think it's very possible that we are seeing like how somebody becomes a true extremist and true believer, that he is going to view Cassian as somebody that he has to stop no matter what, and that's just going to motivate him to go to a deeper, a darker place every single step, and he's going to essentially, even more so than he already has, going to lose himself in that hole, and he's going to be, not that anybody's unredeemable, but that he won't get that redemption arc because he's pushed himself to a place where he is solely focused on getting back at Cassian, and that drive for revenge is going to wind up burning him.
That's what's so interesting about this, is because Star Wars exists within the concept of archetypes, going back to the Campbell background for it. And you have these archetypes, and you have these hero and villain archetypes. And what's fascinating about the show is there's very few archetypes in this show. It's like very much, just people, and you don't really know what they're supposed to necessarily represent. They represent themselves, and you don't have a specific, antagonist archetype being portrayed from Cyril. He's just a guy. He's just a character. You're watching his development. You're watching what he's going through. You're meant to empathize with him to a certain extent and hate him for other reasons. But it's all very balanced. It's all very a fair look at him. And as a result of that, you don't really know what's going to happen with him for sure, because you don't have that leading in from the story. You don't have the way that his scenes are being shot, the way his dialogue's being portrayed, giving you this feeling of, oh, this guy's gonna be really bad or this guy's gonna be really good. Like, you just think, oh, this is a guy and he's just existing, and little tiny things could happen in the future that push him one way or the other. Like, I can imagine him right now, meeting up with either of the two other characters on Coruscant, on the rebellion side, or on the side of the Empire, and him linking up and working with both of them. Like, he could be working with the ISB and helping them, or he could be working with Mon Mothma and helping the rebellion. Like, I can see both of those happening because they've just done such a good job of being balanced with the character that we just don't know where he's gonna fall exactly. We have theories, but when he's looking at that hologram of Cassian, like, is he looking at him like, oh, I want revenge, I got to go after this guy, I'm going to help the ISB go find him and complete my original mission of this murderer, or is he looking at him and thinking, I'm in this helpless situation, the whole world's against me, the Empire, I've become disillusioned with the Empire because they've just taken away my path to success and my mojo. And so maybe if I go find this guy, maybe we can go stick it to the Empire. Like maybe he wants to revenge against the Empire now for what they did to him and humiliating and firing him. Like that's technically a possibility because this show is lifted open enough for it to technically go both ways.
Well, that's what's very Sopranos too, is you never know where Tony was going to end up, but like what Dom was saying, if he I don't think he needs to be redeemed. I just think whatever he chooses, he's gone through the mirror now. And so if he isn't redeemed, it's going to be more tragic because he didn't learn from it when we saw the mirror.
Yeah.
And he could very well end up in a place at the end. He could end up a true believer of the Empire by the end of this season, and by the end of the next season, he's a rebel. Like he could literally flip like that. Like it could be, a quick progression of his, and that would be probably the most interesting story.
Yeah, I think again, just given the way this show has set itself apart from the typical Star Wars lane, I think Cyril Karn is headed towards a tragic ending. And again, we've talked about it in those first 3 episodes. This is a guy who, from a certain point of view, is doing the right thing. Yeah. 2 people have been murdered. He wants to go find out who the killer is and bring the killer to justice. Essentially, that's what you think someone should do when somebody is murdered. But he, winds up with the goofy rent-a-cops and, the Scottish dude who reminds me of an Austin Powers character and, all that stuff. Like it all goes wrong and everything goes wrong. And I think he doesn't blame the Empire because I still think he sees what happened to him as kind of just. That was the right thing that happened. When Ben Bailey Smith's character, Glevin or whatever his name is sort of tearing those guys a new one, and when he fires them all in the last episode, I think Cyril looks at that and goes, "Yeah, that's what had to happen. This was a big mess up. This is a big screw up that I did, that I'm responsible for, and I have to pay the price. Now I have to go home and live with my mother and deal with her." Tearing me down and not offering any sort of support, just, making me feel even worse. And all the while he's thinking, who is to blame? Who's to blame? Who's the game? Who's the blame? It's the guy who killed those 2 dudes. The guy who killed those 2 dudes and then embarrassed me and ruined my life. And so that his eyes are locked on Cassian. He's eventually we're going to see him go after Cassian. I think, just to speculate a little bit, I think Denise Go's character is going to show up at his door, if not next week, then in the next couple of weeks, and that those 2 will wind up teaming up, and he sees nothing but he sees nothing but Cassian, and that's the ending of his story will involve Cassian one way or another. And again, we're outside of the typical Star Wars lane. The typical Star Wars lane is Cassian gets through to him and redeems him, the way Zeb did for Callus, the way Luke did for Anakin, all of that stuff. Ultimately, though, we're in a drama lane, and I think the more fitting ending for a story that's a drama that's in this genre is he's going to come up short in his attempts to take down Cassian, and he's going to lose his life for it. I feel like that fits in with the tone of this show, how it's been set up thus far.
Let's see that.
Poor Cyril.
Have we talked about? I guess we talked about the cereal scene, but I feel like we need to talk about specific scenes.
Well, see, that was an hour straight conversation, no breaks, no. Dominic usually has a guiding of conversation that happens, and that did not happen. We just talked for so much about this episode without that.
Of this episode,
conceptually, yeah. I like it. I like it.
Philosophical.
To the notes.
No, I liked the way I love that conversation. I thought that's what when the show is at its best. I don't have to do anything. I can just sit back and let it go.
I have to say, thank you for making me feel okay that it isn't my favorite thing in the world. Because honestly, I had a very odd experience after the episode, being like, I don't think I enjoyed that. I don't think this episode was for me. And I felt almost guilty about it because that I really haven't experienced that with Star Wars a lot, and also I don't know, I just felt really guilty about it. That it's like,
it's like
this
a
is meant to
weird,
be-
almost
yeah.
FOMO situation where you're
Yes.
like, you
Oh my
you
God,
watch
yes.
something and you're like, what am I missing here? Because I have felt
Yeah.
that way. I've felt that way about a Book of Boba Fett episodes, even Mandalorian episodes, definitely about Obi-Wan Kenobi. Of like, I watched this, I get it. I get why people like it. I don't get why I don't like it. Like, it's just a weird
oh my
place
God,
to be, and
yes.
it's very,
Yes.
very thing. So I'm glad this therapy session helped. I hope
This is
anybody's out there
good.
that's
Yeah, this is-
struggling,
yeah, I
struggling
feel
with
like
their
I should be
feelings on this
lying on
TV
a
show.
This is how I feel about Andor.
How does
in an actual therapy session, my doctor explained to me that there art, Lucas and Picasso both say art is only emotion. My doctor was saying, you just like art, or you're neutral, or you don't like it, and there's variations in those reigns. And he said there's nothing, like in studies they found, there's nothing that anyone could do intellectually that will change your feeling. The feeling of art is the most powerful thing. So, like, maybe do you like shows like The Sopranos and The Crown?
Well, that's really funny that we keep talking about The Crown, actually, because I'm currently midway through that. I'm like currently watching season 3, and I've just binged it all. And I've been loving The Crown, so now I'm like confused even more. I'm like, I love
that's
The
very
Crown.
confusing, yeah.
This is the Star Wars Crown. I don't like this one. Oh God,
That is.
And
confusing.
I am a huge proponent of, like, I think most movies and TV shows can be brought down in their basic forms to your emotional response to it. They are an emotional experience. And we try to quantify it so many times. We get on shows like this and go, well, I disliked it for this, and this, or I disliked it for this, and this. And it's like, if it doesn't make you feel a certain way, it really doesn't matter how good or bad it is from an objective, quote unquote, objective point of view. You're going to watch it and go, oh, I felt really good, or I didn't feel anything. What's the matter here? And ultimately, there's a lot of highly praised movies that I don't care for, and there's other movies that I love that everyone hates. So, what the hell?
Yeah, and like that goes down to also, like, again, me being a fan of film before being a fan of Star Wars, because like there are film moments that get me just as like geeked out and excited in Star Wars as the Star Wars moments. Like, you have the Star Wars moments, like, oh my gosh, like they've slashed Darth Vader's mask, and you could see Hayden Christensen, and the voice is oscillating between the James S. Earl Jones and the Christensen voice, and like that's pretty rad. But then, like, there are film moments like, oh, they're talking about like how Imperial soldiers, what their posture is, and then you cut to a scene of Imperial soldiers walking in that posture.
Superb editing.
Exactly.
Superb.
And I'm like, that got me just as much. I was like, yes, like you nailed that one. Like, that was the perfect segue transition from someone talking about something and then you seeing it, and yet it doesn't feel hokey because it still fits with the story. Like, you could have put that scene interspersed anywhere. It had nothing to do with the rest of the story. They chose to put it right after that line of dialogue, so that there was just that moment of flow and connection, and knowing how to flow within editing is, that's an art form within itself that I personally appreciate, because Star Wars a lot of times screws it up, and I'm like, why did you edit it like that? But this episode had that really good flow and edit to it, and that was a prime example of putting something in the exact right spot when you could have put it anywhere.
Yeah, Ryan Johnson got a little bit cute with that at the beginning of The Last Jedi, where Finn goes, "Where's Rey?" Cut to Rey. Luke goes, "Where's Han?" Cut to Kylo Ren. He did it. It was a little bit. This was subtler. Susanna White and the Gilroys were a little subtler in this moment, but it's that same idea of using every tool in the filmmaking sort of tool chest to tell your story. And editing is one that sometimes gets overlooked, and you can use it in ways that are more than just cutting from this location to that location. You can use it to convey little details about the story, or use it to remind people of a movie that they saw 2 years ago. That's sort of what Ryan was doing, whereas in this episode they were more just emphasizing, how does an Imperial soldier walk. And so then when you see them in the next scene, when you see the rebel crew in their next scene and they're doing the march, you're like, oh yeah, they're there. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're actually learning this stuff that the real Imperials are just out there doing. And that's how they're going to succeed or fail, it's in the details.
Yeah. The one thing I want to bring up is Cassian specifically and his character in this episode. Because upon deep reflection on my, hesitancy, I'll call it, with this episode, I think a part of it comes from I'm not connecting to Cassian. And it's kind of funny. It's like that's a part of why I'm maybe not enjoying it. But it's also, I think, will pay off really, really well. Because I think they've purposely maybe written him to be, obviously he's quite closed off. He is very defensive. He's not very vulnerable with the people around him. But I feel like that's so extreme that my interpretation of everything and my experience to connect with Cassian on screen, like I can't connect with him yet. And I'm like annoyed about that. But I'm like, I'm sure later on we'll be very invested emotionally of an experience, the journey and experiences he has and goes on. Does that make sense? Where it's like he's so closed off.
Yeah,
he's
but
not
it's for the reason.
Yeah,
right?
he's not set up through these 5 episodes as being very likable. And honestly, through the first half of Rogue One, he's not set up as being very likable then either. It's really only in the last act.
Cassian straight up sucks.
And that's why
that he comes around.
That's why I will say that I don't think you're ever gonna get that, Hannah, from him. I
think you get flashes of it.
You might,
because I do think there is a moment in this episode where he is actually quite likable, and that's when he comes clean.
That's true.
To the crew, and he says, I was paid. I was paid to be here. And then he has that whole speech about how, the night before is the most difficult. There's too much waiting around. There's nothing left to do other than worry about what can go wrong. And so you get jittery, and you either, you either wind up just being scared because that's how everybody's going to be. There have been things that have been great that I've done that the night before I've wanted to back out of. Because the night before is terrifying.
That was a good line. That was a good line.
But it's a matter of, are you going to be just nervous, or are you going to get cold feet and need to actually back out of it? And you have to take that time and embrace the fear that you're feeling and understand what kind of fear is it. Is it something that can be overcome? Okay, then go do it and overcome it. Or is it the kind of thing that can't be overcome, in which case maybe you need to back off and maybe you need to wait a little longer and prepare a little bit more, not just in terms of the plan and how you're going to break into the Imperial facility, but just emotionally prepare a little bit more.
He speaks the truth, which is, I suppose, a likable element. But remember, Darth Maul also speaks lots of truth. And
there are moments where I'm like, hey, Darth Maul's a pretty cool guy.
So maybe that makes Darth Maul likable as an anti-hero like character. But
well, that's I mean, you just used the word anti-hero. Like that's the kind of that's the appeal of an anti-hero is that you can watch them and disagree with everything they're saying and everything they're doing, but you still want to watch them. You still want to follow them. Giancarlo Esposito, we think of him as Moff Gideon, but in his other most famous role as Gus Fring, there's a moment in Better Call Saul. There's a scene where he talks to his employees at Los Pollos Hermanos, which is his cover story, the chicken restaurant that he runs. And when he talks to them and there's this scene where he gives this like rousing speech, and I'm like, yes, Gus Fring for president, let's go. Like you want to follow this guy. He's so inspiring. And yet at the same time, he's this murderous drug kingpin. Yep. So, I'm not saying that's what Cassian is, but there are going to be moments where he's likable and where he speaks the truth that makes him likable. But there's also going to be a lot of time spent where we're like, oh, he's kind of a jerk. When the other guy's trying to get him to march properly, he's like, don't touch me. And he's ready to fight at any moment. Not the most likable guy, but he has his flashes. And those are those flashes that we know eventually pay off in Rogue One.
Here's the thing, with the exception of, perhaps his pursuit of his sister, which drop storyline. What the heck happened to that?
I mean, we're gonna circle back
I'm
to
sure
that.
it'll circle back, and thankfully the other stuff has been good enough to not make me miss that. Otherwise, it certainly would be a detractor. But with the exception of perhaps that, which we could have mixed motivations, I guess, for, he really seems to be very selfishly motivated, which again makes sense because he's selfishly motivated through Rogue One, and the whole process of Rogue One is him deciding to do something not selfish for once and to save Galen Erso's life, or attempt to, I should say, but not kill him. Choose to not kill him.
I don't know if he's selfish in Rogue One.
Yes, he is. Because
I think by the time Rogue One comes around, he's committed to the rebellion, and he's committed to doing things for the rebellion. He's just doing them in a really morally ambiguous way.
That's the question that we have is why is he? We don't know what his motivations are for doing what he's doing in Rogue One, and I think perhaps this show will answer that question, because right now his motivations are survival.
Yes,
that is what he's trying to do. He's trying to survive. He's trying to go from one place to the next. He's trying to get resources. So that is very selfish. That is very selfish. He will put his survival ahead of anybody else's life at this point, I'm pretty sure. But again, we see him putting the rebellion before anybody else's life, and we wonder, okay, is he still surviving at that point? Does he feel like being part of the rebellion and fighting for it is the only thing he can do for survival at that point? And perhaps that is the case. I mean, you think about it, he's many times over a wanted man. He was already hiding where he was now with a record, and now he's killed. He's killed people on the record. At least one person knows and has connected that, and Cyril. And you got to think that information is gonna spread, and you got to think that the ISB eventually is gonna get on it. And so, he could be at a point where he kind of makes that decision of as long as the Empire is out there, I'm going to have to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. If I can help the rebels defeat the Empire, then I've created a new paradigm in the universe where I am safe. And that potentially could still be his motivation, even for taking down an entire empire and helping out the good guys. It could still not be a good guy motivation, which would explain why he's willing to do things morally that seem antithetical to the purpose of the rebellion.
But he says in Rogue One, he says, everything I did for the rebellion. Every time I did something I didn't want to walk away from, I told myself it's because it was for a cause that I believed in. What I'm thinking is that between now, where he is just sort of out for survival, out for himself, and when we get to that moment in Rogue One, some stuff's going to happen that makes him believe in the cause. I think that we're going to see that over the course of this season, and we'll see it over the course of next season, so that he is a true believer. He just goes about it in a way that, we find morally ambiguous, as Din said, which is like all rebellions. So I don't think Cassian is selfish in Rogue One, but he is in a place that he needs to be snapped out of, and that's what Jin does with him in the film.
I think I just realized what this show is doing is it's showing you a scale of it, instead of good, dark, and light side. And George Lucas actually talked about this, that he said the dark and light side to him was in a talk at some school. It's on YouTube, that there's selfish and selfless. And so what this show is actually doing is it's showing everyone on a scale.
Yeah.
And I think when Cassian says in Rogue One, I've been fighting it all my life, I think he's actually he's more on the scale towards selfless. He just doesn't know how to go about doing it. And so I think he's already, when he decided to go on this, I don't think he's doing it for the money. What's his name? Luthen said, do you want to just keep doing your useless things against the Empire? Do you want to make it count in one big thing? He kind of puts he's already making a selfless choice. He could come out of this dead, I don't think it'll be interesting to see what he does with the money at the end.
And there's a parallel there to the character of Han Solo. Han Solo
it's that whole classic Star Wars thing.
Yeah, Han Solo has that veneer of selfishness. He's being given a reward for what he's doing, and there's that whole fight between him and Leia about the reward and everything. But then he comes back, and he always comes back and fights even when he doesn't have to. And so I think perhaps with Cassian, if he is indeed already very much a selfless character, then perhaps the selfishness is a facade that he's putting on. And at this point, it's an act. Him saying like, I'm just here for the money is just an act because he has to put out that bravado because he thinks he needs to survive. But deep down, that's not really him. And then that, of course, brings up the question, because look at Darth Vader. Look at the most selfish character in Star Wars, Anakin Skywalker. The I don't know if it's epitome or epitome because I hear people pronouncing it both ways, but epitome of selfishness, Anakin Skywalker.
Wow.
And
Epitome. Mais oui.
Yes. So like, but look at him. He does the most selfless thing you could possibly do. He sacrifices his life to save his son. There, you knew that there always had to be that grain of selflessness within him, the true Anakin Skywalker that was always existing. And so that then brings up the question of, is it a scale of selflessness or selfishness, or is it how thick a selfish disguise do you have on your inherently selfless soul?
Oh, I don't think anyone's inherently that's what I think is the gray areas of Star Wars is like Jake, Anakin starts off very selflessly as a kid, and it's what do the circumstances do?
Yeah.
And like everyone on this show is George got more nuanced with it with the prequels and Clone Wars, and then this show just takes it even further. Like I'm looking forward to seeing the husband of Mon Mothma, who right now they're showing, he's on the selfish side, like he's a libertine.
Yeah.
But he's also a family person. So what is he doing that's selfless in context of that? So I think the brilliance of this show and taking a slow look at something in Soprano style is to say that no one's actually inherently either on either of those sides. And it's all every day and every hour and every, am I going to talk or am I going to let Ben talk?
Yeah. I mean,
it's always moment to moment to moment.
Yeah.
Selfish or selfless. And this is not.
And something that Dave Filoni, I think, has talked
anyone.
about.
Yeah.
Dave Filoni has talked about in the past how that the dark side and light side and how you kind of apply it to real life is a daily choice. It's a daily, you wake up in the morning and what kind of person am I going to be today? We aren't really selfish or selfless. It's, I'll take a line from a recent great Marvel show. Good is not something you are. It's something that you do.
Yeah.
And choose to do moment to moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I think everything about this show is very Star Wars. I'm trying to convince Hannah of that, even though though biologically there's nothing you could do. There's no intellectual thing that we could say to make you feel different. The emotion is always going to trump everything.
I just can't believe Hannah hates Andor with a passion. I just don't understand it.
Oh, bad.
Just spreading the hate.
Yeah. But, just to go to Mon Mothma and her husband, I think that's an interesting place to continue this sort of thought on, good, evil, selfish, selfless. Mon Mothma's.
Mon Mothma. Yeah.
It's you're seeing the cost of those decisions. Those decisions to be selfless and stick your neck out for the rebellion the way Mon Mothma is. Just because she may be doing the right quote unquote thing doesn't mean that it's without consequence, and that doesn't mean that it makes her life awesome. And we see that in the way that her relationship with her husband and her daughter play out. Talk about your reveals in this episode. Who knew Mon Mothma had a daughter, and who knew, things would be so tense between the two of them. Mon Mothma's wild. We think Luke and Uncle Owen in A New Hope having their little throwdown at the family table about sticking around for a whole nother season is tense. This puts that to shame. With this the conversation about that Mon Mothma and her daughter have, and you see it in the way. And this is credit to the director, to Susanna White. You see it in the way that scene is laid out, the way it's blocked. Mon Mothma is sitting at the head of the table, and both her daughter and her husband are sitting 2 seats away from her. she's completely isolated. And even though they're sitting on opposite sides of the table, father and daughter, they're at least sitting close to each other. And you can see that there is sort of there's a bond there and there's a connection there. And some of that connection is they both feel like they're being ignored by Mon Mothma. They both feel like that she thinks she's too important for them. And, the reality may be what Mon Mothma is doing may be more important than what happens to these two people. But that doesn't make those two people feel all that great. They feel left out of her life. And,
I wouldn't say more important. If you can't create peace in the home, why the hell would you be creating it anywhere else?
It's a good point.
So that's the kid, the child who's not lost their innocence. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
There's a child who hasn't lost a child who sees things more clear is able to say, well, you're just doing this to show me for your selfish reason, for your purpose. So that's where she is on the selfish scale, using her daughter.
And I won't call any names, but I've heard plenty of biographies of famous people that were created, people that changed the world for the better, that ultimately neglected their families. That their families, their kids are not close to them because they were busy off doing something great for the world.
I mean, we've just spent a lot of time singing the praises of George Lucas, but I think we should all ask Marsha Lucas what she thought of how their marriage went. There's a reason they divorced before Return of the Jedi. George was so focused on making his movies that he wouldn't be the husband that Marsha wanted him to be. There's the story is, she wanted to go on vacation after those movies were coming out. And it's, this is just sort of one incident that's indicative of how, and they never did. It's just, that's one thing, that's one incident, but it speaks to a larger problem. And, again, love George, love his work, love what he did, but, he also exists somewhere on that selfish to selfless scale, much in the same way that Mon Mothma does in this episode.
You have to figure the human element, the family element. We're all connected to someone, and it begs the question for the future. Like, we know what happens to Mon Mothma. We know she has a great speech. She denounces the Emperor. She goes on the run. She becomes part of the rebellion. She eventually becomes Chancellor of the Republic, the New Republic. What happens to her kid? What happens to her husband? How do they figure into this? How is she putting her family at danger when she calls out Palpatine and does all that?
Yeah. I think that's going to be one of the things that, one of those unexpected storylines for this show going through the rest of this season and possibly into the next one is, what happens to Mon Mothma's family? Because we've never heard of them before. They're new for this. And, right now, they don't exactly seem like they're true believers in the same cause that she is.
Or are they even aware?
Yeah. Or are they even aware? Does she trust them with that information? Like, does she trust them, or is she doing the superhero thing of, I'm keeping my identity a secret to keep you safe? This is going to drive 4 seasons of Arrow. I can't tell anybody.
When I started hearing about this charity foundation, I'm like, is this her cover for funneling funds to the rebellion? Is this what he's talking about?
I'm just picturing her on a rooftop, white cape billowing. She puts on a mask. Wear the mask.
Pull out the moth symbol.
The moth light. I do. That's kind of interesting. Her charity is her funneling money to the rebellion. What an interesting inversion of how we usually view that sort of thing.
Yeah,
that would be
she's clearly trying to throw him off.
Imagine Mon Mothma, being caught in this and, being dragged in front of some Imperial Senate committee and having to answer for this and, being made to look like a bad guy. When in reality, we know she's, funneling that money through Luthen to go and fund the rebellion that will one day.
Just, adjusters trying to do their job. Just good people complaining about emoluments. Like, it's not their fault that she stole money from the Empire.
That said, when people
fascinating.
that said, when people do steal money from charity, by and large, it's not a good thing. By and large, that's something that should be looked into.
Yes.
But as a one-off for an interesting story, okay, I'm on board. I'm not. Yeah.
Embezzler, that great embezzler.
Mon Mothma. That's why she had to go on the run. She was wanted for embezzlement.
I have a question.
Okay.
So no, you go, Din, because I was changing tracks.
Oh well, okay. Just to end that track, it could be setting up a theme of social justice. Charity never solves the problems, and people have this like myopic, one-eyed view that charity is the only good thing that you need to do, but really you have to get to the root cause of the problems, and that's where social justice comes in. So I hope that's thematic with what she's doing. So,
I mean, it's not like there is a manifesto in this episode or anything.
Oh, we got to get to that. Like, great Star Wars is when it presents you with a new idea that you can't stop thinking about. Or it just stays with you forever and you think and you question it.
Yeah.
What's your question, Hannah?
Because I have a question, because there's a part of this episode I just completely did not understand, which was near the end. Actually, I think it was the final scene where we see Luthen and his protege, assistant, woman, helper. I don't know who that is. Claire. There we go. She has a name, Claire. Oh my god.
I don't know. I liked woman helper.
I know, it's quite derogatory, actually. Woman.
I'm just gonna say it's a good thing you're the one to say it.
We're all thinking that. We're all thinking that. Glad it wasn't me this time.
Oh my god. Okay. Well, anyway, Claire, and they shared this very odd scene where Luthen is quite clearly, I think he's trying to contact Aldhani and maybe what's happening on Aldhani. And she kind of gives him the order to be like, get off the phone. What are you doing? Like, they're not going to call you. Like, come on. Like, we got clients in the morning. And she's quite demanding of his time and what he's doing. And he's quite, I want to say, like, anxious in this. I got an anxious feeling from him in this scene. And then it's just like, he's like, all right, and then puts the phone down and like, they go out of the room. And I was, and it ends. And I think that's one of my biggest moments. I was like, what was that for? I was like, what was this scene for? And I can't read into why he would be anxious. Like, is it just simply he wants the mission to go well, or is it something deeper?
I know what's going on. Okay, so here's the thing. This is gravitas. So we've seen people do some pretty ballsy, incredible things in Star Wars. Like Luke Skywalker, who's only flown a T-16 Skyhopper and shot at rats on a desert planet in his life, decides that he's going to get in an X-Wing, turn off the targeting computer, and use his feelings to blow up this massive thing that kills 1 million people on board. Like, it's freaking ballsy, incredible, amazing thing that you see in the first Star Wars movie. And there's many, many other things like that. And you don't always feel the gravitas of it within the scale of real life feelings and events. And here's the thing is, so we've been kind of desensitized to just these big things happening because Star Wars is basically made up of primarily big things. That's one of the things within that homeostatic property cluster. There's going to be a quiz later, Din. And
homeostatic property cluster. I got it underlined.
It's my life mission to make people know what this word means because of all the applications to social sciences.
God, I love it.
Oh man. So here's the thing is, think about what Luthen is doing. Like, he is a Coruscanti who is on this planet, and apparently he's got a pretty cushy life, selling antiques with this helper of his, and like his lady helper, and and he is plotting to steal millions of credits from the Empire. This is this massive plot.
Guess so.
And not only is he plotting to just steal this and pull off this thing that's never been done before. This has never been done before. But his plan is to then use it to take down an entire intragalactic government. Like, that is like intense. That is a lot of weight on an average everyday person's shoulders to be doing this. It is incredibly ballsy. It's incredibly ambitious. It's incredibly dangerous. He knows that at any moment the ISB can come knocking on the door and say, off to the blaster range or whatever it is.
The gulag.
Off to the gulag.
In the street.
And he's sitting there thinking, I just bet my life on this Cassian dude. Like, he knows who I am. He knows my name. He knows my face. He knows where my work business is. He knows my lady helper. No, he doesn't know her. But he knows.
Oh no, he knows my lady helper.
My Mothma does. But
foiled again.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm just banking all this. If this guy goes rogue, he could get caught by the Empire and say, hey, spare my life, I'll tell you who's really behind this, and then he could get set free or his sentence reduced by turning him in. So like, it's like this guy within the context. If you just imagine this guy is just like a dude. Like, this is this massive thing that's happening around. Like, think about the things that we get nervous for. Oh, we have a job interview tomorrow and we're nervous. We're nervous. We want to throw up. And this guy is stealing millions of credits from the Empire and could get killed at any moment.
The whole episode like kind of revolves around the whole team like gearing up for this mission, and then Cassian has the great speech about nervousness and getting down to the last day and all this kind of stuff and being scared, and they're at each other's throats. Literally, they're so nervous about this. And they're just worried about not dying, pretty much. Yeah. Like, they just want this to work and not to get killed doing it. Luthen knows the full picture. He knows what's at stake here. He probably knows how he's going to spend the money when he gets it. And he also knows his neck's going to be on the line if something happens, if someone gets captured, someone squeals, anything could happen.
The whole rebellion could be messed from before it starts.
Exactly. So I think Luthen is like feeling the nervousness, tenfold.
Yeah. 3 points that have come out of this. First, we know that just looking at Star Wars, we know that he's right to be nervous because we've seen what can go wrong when people bet the farm on a mercenary. We see that in The Last Jedi when Finn and Rose bet everything on DJ. He sells them out, and the Resistance is almost entirely wiped out because of it. Second, this scene, Ben, you brought up the fan theory last week that Vel might be Luthen's daughter. This scene kind of points us in that direction.
Although I think she has a last name that's not real.
Yeah, she can change it. She can change. She kept her mother's. She kept her mother's
really
last name.
Could be a misdirect.
Yeah. And third, Chris, you made a point I tried to make during Kenobi about the stakes. Mm-hmm. And how we don't always appreciate the stakes, and Star Wars doesn't always want us, or doesn't always let us appreciate the stakes. Mm-hmm. And it connects to one of the most tragic scenes in all of Kenobi, which is when Wade died and everybody was sad about it. And you guys were all like, why are we sad about Wade? We don't care about Wade. This is because, for once it showed us the stakes that even when these characters that we don't have time to learn about and time to understand them, they matter to other people. And it made me think of that moment. But it's, it's the stakes. We don't always think about it because we just think, oh yeah, it's going to be a heist. Action adventure heists, those tend to work. Things will go slightly wrong, but in the end, they'll go off. Things will go correctly. But in a drama heist, that things could go very wrong. And as you said, Din, the whole rebellion could be riding on this moment. So, yeah, I don't think I'd be able to sleep either.
I think A New Hope was expertly cut, to build for the time to create all that tension. They go through the strategic military stuff. They show people. You feel like this Death Star might wipe out these rebels, and you feel the implications on it. But this all really, I think, comes down to filmmaking, as Chris was saying. And with Star Wars, I don't want to hate on Rise of Skywalker because I know that there's a lot of people that love it, but and I'm happy for the people that love it, and I could see why it's great for people, but you don't feel the stakes for everyone else in the galaxy in that movie. And you don't feel the 10 billion Star Destroyers. You don't feel the damage they could do. And Peter, watching the special features of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I've done about 5 to 10 times in my life, Peter Jackson talks about how he studied the movie Zulu, which was set in Africa, and it was a British garrison that was attacked by, they were being colonial, and they were attacked by African tribes. But the whole movie is the setup to the battle at the end, so that you feel what the ramifications are going to be on every character. And they did that for the Two Towers, and that's why that battle, you really feel like you feel what Aragorn was going through, Gimli, Legolas, they all have their issues. It's as well done as any 2.5 hour movie can do it in, but this show now has 6 hours or whatever, so they're like, we're really going to do it right. And that's why I say it's an expertly crafted work of genius, because they are doing it right. They poetically, all those people are sort of going through the same pre-game jitters in their unique way, that's where you feel the ramification on their life for who they are. Like, I don't even know the guy's name who had the freak out on Cassian, but I felt like, he's using Cassian as an excuse because he's scared Poodulus. Like, that was a really genius sort of new angle that we haven't seen in Star Wars before. And it's all, I think, tied back to the history of filmmaking and movies like Zulu to set you up for this final battle. So like Chris was saying at the beginning of this podcast, by the time we get to that battle, if they succeed in what they're trying to do, which is obvious, which is to feel the ramifications for everyone and everything, from every person to the whole, every micro level of every person's life to the macro of the ramification on the galaxy. If they pull off what they're trying to do, we're going to feel this battle like we haven't felt a Star Wars battle in a long time.
Yeah,
absolutely. Manifesto boy, I can't remember his name, but he was brought up. Yeah, he was brought up earlier, and I wanted to circle back to him because, again, we get a very Nemec. Yeah,
Nemec.
I like that. Yeah,
That's it.
I like that kid. He's not going to survive next week, but I like it. Dan, I'm gonna throw it over to you because you brought him up earlier. What did you make of that scene between him and Cassian where he talks about the navigational device and his manifesto that he's writing?
Well, it's why I don't have sync on any of my computer devices or phones. It's why I drive a bicycle and not an e-bike, because I know.
Like you said, drive.
Freedom.
Drive a bicycle.
Ride.
Oh, right.
But see, it's such a perfect thing. He presented us with an idea of what is freedom, and so essentially, freedom is also a scale. Like, you can't in any society, and this comes down to like Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote these great pieces on all this stuff about humanity, which influenced the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and the American Revolution and blah blah blah. But freedom is something that is a scale, and they've gone way too far towards not having freedom. So now, therefore, there's a rebellion. So what he's showing in the metaphor of the book and the device. What was the device for again, by the way?
Navigation.
Yeah.
No, it's a Polaroid camera adapted to be
right.
But he's saying, so it's more it's not run on software, blah blah blah. So it's like, how much freedom are you going to have when the grid goes down? The more you're dependent upon technology, the less freedom you're going to have when you can't access those technologies, right? And so he likes the idea of clarity with this piece of tech that he can use to navigate, because if something breaks, he's so clear about it and how it works, he can fix it himself. And so I think when you compare it to his book, he's trying to get what's being presented is that in this book, he will be talking about what are clear ideas of freedom. And he just before that said the pace of oppression outpaces our ability to understand it. So that's muddy and it's not clear. And that's how they're getting away with hoodwinking the entire galaxy. So their freedom to even think is being taken away because they can't even think fast enough to keep up with. That's essentially what I think it is that he's presenting the idea that freedom on a macro level for the entire galaxy is to be able to say, well, probably people need, whatever basic freedoms are, like right to pursuit of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right to housing, right to education, right to food and water, right to movement. And those rights are presumably being stripped away more and more by the Empire at this quick pace. So it really is just meant to make the viewer question what freedom is. And freedom, you should have clear ideas about what freedom is. Living in a society responsibly, and the people that are then also defining the society.
And you know what's really interesting about this is it brings something into Star Wars that we haven't really seen, which is Star Wars. We're usually looking at the level of those fighting in the Wars of the Stars. And we it brings this assumption because of the perspectivism that George Lucas put on Star Wars that continued with Filoni and Favreau and others, is this idea that these decisions are being made by this group of warriors and political figures. It's like the Padmes and the Leias and the Lukes and the Anakins and Mon Mothma and Bail Organa and all these really powerful people. They're the ones that are making the decisions. And in reality, like rebellions and changes, social changes and structural changes don't necessarily happen that way. They tend to happen by thinkers influencing a populace. Like, again, referencing Voltaire as you did, Dan, or Thomas Paine in America, for example, with Common Sense in his publications. Like that is what influenced people. And then there was a need for leaders to step up and lead the revolution. But the revolution was at the tip of a pen in those situations, not political figures just deciding, oh, we're just going to do this or that. And so I think that it's interesting to add this nuance into Star Wars because he's very much, that Thomas Paine like character of, I'm going to write this pamphlet and then I'm going to convince people, why they need to be fighting for the cause that is truly in their best interests.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you to control people, you control their ideas. Yeah. That's another nuance of freedom here. Like, oh man, it's because he would be attempting to control people's ideas through what he's publishing, but that's a whole other. I shouldn't even be going there.
I mean,
but,
yeah. See, this is the part where we fall off that little deep
end. Yeah.
On every episode, and then I start talking about deconstructionism.
I won't go there. But the point is to make you go there, to question how much freedom do you have, what choices are being made for you, what thoughts are yours. You join this rebellion. Is it because it's going on with all these characters? They keep questioning, why are you in the rebellion? Well, are you in it because you read this kid's book? Or do you have your own reason? Like, do you think for yourself? So that's what's awesome about any Star Wars presents an idea that you just have to keep thinking about,
Yeah. Are you in it because you read the kid's book? Or are you in it because your brother was trampled on by the Empire and killed himself? Like, that's something that I think is really interesting.
And if you're doing it impulsively, are you truly free? I don't know, all this stuff.
Well, and that's something that I think this show is setting up in a really interesting way is, everyone has their own reason for being in the rebellion, but also everyone has their own reason for being in the Empire. And, we're seeing that, play out, on the rebel side on Aldhani with, Cassian and Vel and the crew. But then, as we were talking about earlier, we're seeing the play out with Cyril. We see it's sort of slowly being drawn out with Deidre, Denise Go's character. I think we'll see it more potentially more with some other Imperial characters as we go down the line. But everybody's got their reason for what they're doing, and you may not agree with the reason, you may not agree with what they're actually doing, but a great show and a great story can make you understand, even if you don't agree. And I will just say, I think, just to, try and peer into the crystal ball a little bit and go back to that conversation we were having about Cassian. Like I said, I don't think Nevik is long for this world. I think we're going to lose him next week. But I think Cassian's going to find his ideas. He's going to find that book of his. He's going to read it. And, that might put him more on the track that we were talking about earlier that has him as a true believer in the rebel cause, whether or not he's going about it in the quote unquote right way, is, his arc.
Being
for
radicalized
Rogue
by
One.
rebel propaganda.
There it is. There it is. That's the rest of season 1 and season 2 laid out for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a parallel to sort of like Che Guevara too, in his writings. I've always thought that Cassian is a bit of a Che.
Oh yeah,
he has elements in his character,
Yeah.
So I'm expecting to see at some point you can kill a person, but not the idea type of thing in this show.
100%.
For sure. For sure. Wow, that was 2 hours of conversation about this episode, more or less. And as always, I feel like we've just scratched the surface. So knowing that the conversation will continue in the weeks to come, I'll throw it out to anybody if there's anything else we want to bring up before we hit final thoughts and scores out of 10.
Oh my god.
I know there's so much, but Hannah, take it away.
What's with the milk? Why is the milk so important? That was so emphasized. That was so crucial of a diet. They were like, hey, you've got to drink this milk. Like, and then he was like,
it's good for your bones.
After a few days, you're going to go on a
question your existence.
Trip? I don't know. Yeah. And then later on, the guy's like, Cassian, finish your milk. Like, you've got a big day. Finish your milk. It's
Thank
like,
you.
What the hell is this? What is the symbol of this milk? What is it? What is the filmmaker trying to tell us with this milk?
Yeah.
And then
there's a whole history of milk in cinema.
Mon Mothma asked her daughter, "Have you had breakfast?" She was probably going to have cereal with blue milk. And then what does that mean? There's all in there.
Like Cyril Khan has the blue milk. Cassian has the pink milk. What's happening?
What color milk are they
what
drinking?
What is it about
on
breakfast that you don't? What is it about you're trying to tell us?
Most important meal of the day. That's just what Tony believes, and he wants us to know that. He's putting it into his art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's the real meaning. Yeah. Actually, I just another last thought, which is like 3 minutes delay to our conversation of Nemik just then.
Mm-hmm.
Nemik, I think, is the symbol of or embodiment of a moral compass and the concept of a moral compass. And I agree that I feel like he'll probably die in the next episode or at some point, and he'll die, and it will be some symbol of the moral compass dying in the sense that you need your own, and Cassian needed to build his own. Like, he was just sitting there listening to Nemik just say these words at him, and he's like, and then they ask him, what do you believe in, Cassian? And he's just like, what do you say? I know what I believe in, but the rest.
He says, I know what I'm against.
Yes. There you go. And so, I think he's at a point where, he really isn't thinking deep ethical thoughts of like what is he going for? What is his purpose? And I think Nemik dying will actually, not because of the relationship, but I think it symbolizes that like the moral compass of just shrugging your shoulders and being like, oh yeah, the world's fine, is gone. Like, you can't do that anymore in this state of the Empire. You have to wake up and be like, I got to choose something here, because I can't just follow whoever. It's like, I got to choose my purpose and listen to my own moral compass, not someone else's, to make choices.
Yeah.
Anyway,
wake up and smell the milk.
Yeah,
exactly.
Two things on that. One, it wasn't until you said the words moral compass that it occurred to me the symbolism of him having a navigational device, and he's kind of the moral compass of the show. Yeah. But yeah, we spent a lot of time in this episode. This is the second thing. Again, like I said, on everybody has a reason for being a part of the rebellion, and we still don't really know Cassian's. He's still presenting himself as the mercenary. And, I think in part from reading what Nemec would write, but also just in looking back into his past, and this is where the sister storyline could come back into things. I think, over the course of this season, we will witness Cassian finding his reason to fight. Not his reason to survive, not his reason to want to poke the Empire in the eyes, but his reason to want to tear this whole thing down.
Yeah.
Anything else, or should we do final thoughts and scores out of 10?
Well, I have one thing.
Oh, is it time? Oh, Ben, is it time for Ben's Connection Corner?
It's time.
It's time. Oh my God. It's Ben's Connection Corner. Connections in the corner with Ben. It's Ben's Connection Corner. Do.
Did that start last week? I think that was last week, right?
Kinda. I don't know. I don't know where this came from. I don't know where it's going.
I don't know how we all danced the same. I
know that was weird.
That so well.
It's like, I don't know what I've done here. I promise this is not too long. We'll won't keep you too much longer. I will mention. I know I'm probably the only person on the show that appreciates this, but I'm going to mention it anyway. We have the latest Agents of S.W.U. cast member has joined the Star Wars universe. Corporal Kenzie, who's the guy on the rooftop. I think he's played by Nick Blood. People will remember him as I think Agent Hunter from Agents of S.W.U. back in the day. So he follows Ming-Na Wen and I think a few other people who have come from Marvel over to Star Wars.
Nice.
I have to point out that Deidre talks about different rebellions and different incidents of rebellion. She mentions Kessel. And if she's actually talking about the slave rebellion that Han started, that actually wasn't organized. It was just something that happened. So if that's actually what she's referring to, that's funny.
Yeah,
that is funny.
Lita Mothma. I don't know. Maybe that's
a good segment.
I learned that her husband's actually has a different, like the Chandrila like naming system is different. Like they don't have the like her husband's name is like Nim something. I'm not sure. So
that's my favorite character's name. Nim something. Classic Star Wars name.
But and I'm not going to steal the thunder of a good old Alex from Star Wars explaining, because he did a whole video on this thing. This is where I learned this fact. So full disclosure there. But Lita is not introduced in this episode. Nor the character nor the name came elsewhere. This is not a deep cut for Star Wars canon or even Star Wars Legends. This goes back to a old Star Wars Infinities comic where there's an incident where Alex explains it better than I can, but basically it's an Infinities comic where there's a Hoth rebel soldier and he's like, hey, take this message to my mom, and then it ends up his mom is Mon Mothma, and he's like, give my best to Lita. Like that's where the name comes from.
Wow.
Like so the writers of this show, Tony Gilroy, whatever, they're giving some deep cuts out to some good old not even Legends, some just non-canon stuff from way back in the day.
Now Ben, I hate to interrupt it. I hate to talk out of place in your corner.
How dare you?
But Matthew Hardy in the chat raises an interesting point that when they're referring to Kessel, they might not be referring to Solo, but they might actually be referring to Spark of Rebellion, the premiere of Rebels,
which would be much closer in the timeline to this.
Yep.
And that is
Rebels
part of the organized rebellion.
Exactly. There you
so
gotta be
not to like outshine you in your segment, but you're wrong.
No, look, I can recognize when I'm being outshined. I'll say, okay, so no worries there.
They were weird looking Wookiees, and I agree. That was very
and this is the portion of Ben's Connection Corner where I just mention things that I think are cool. That whatever. The tunnel in the background when you go down into the rails. I still don't know how that thing works. I'm very much looking for the next episode because I'm like, they explained it several times. I still don't get it. But there's a tunnel behind the commander that looks suspiciously like the tension block from A New Hope. It's like in the same like weirdly like octagonal something or another. I'm not sure. It's weird.
Technical.
Yeah, that's a word I just made up.
Technical.
I love that there's just dry cleaning on the streets of Ferrix. Like there's just in the background, there's just someone's like imperial tunic and a nice like dry cleaning bag. It's just like I love the mundane stuff, the just absolutely stupidly mundane stuff that show puts to the forefront. And also, Hosnian Prime keeps getting name dropped.
Yeah,
in the airport, in the spaceport scene, in the previous episode, you hear them announce, "Ship to Hosnian Prime," blah, 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 and then they're talking about it here. And it's just like, I think it was, shout out to Joel, I think, who mentioned on Twitter, it's like, oh, it's a sequel planet in a kind of a original trilogy setting mentioned on a prequel planet. Like, it's just bonkers.
Yeah.
That's cool.
They did though say something about Hosnian Prime being useless, and I was like, I wonder if there's a little commentary from the from some disgruntled members of the story group, because this didn't come from Dan Gilroy.
There's always some truth in legends.
All right, does that conclude?
And that concludes
I think so.
Connections Corner.
Ben Connections Corner. Connections with Ben in the corner. Do 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 do. All right, let's go around the table one last time.
Octagonal is a planet in the system with Exegol, by the way.
Well, that's an interesting.
I like
take
how
for a
you
planet.
sat on that for like two minutes.
I didn't want to interrupt Ben again. I had to sit on it.
Yeah, that's exactly where I got it from. Totally. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. All right, let's go around the table one final time, give final thoughts and scores out of 10. And Ben, we'll start with you again. We've let you out of your corner. Give us your final thoughts and score out of 10 for The Axe Forgets.
Yeah, so as I said, I really like this episode. I feel like we haven't even talked about this episode tonight. There's so many things. But I really did enjoy this episode. And even though, like, realistically, I feel like I should hate this episode, but I don't. There's so much thing, and it's the world building, it's the character development, it's everything. And I think you could make the argument, well, why didn't they just skip to why didn't they get to the good stuff? Why didn't we get to the heist? But I think going from the previous episode and just like if they just started the heist, like we wouldn't know anything about these characters. I don't feel like I would know them better. I wouldn't care about them as much as I do right now. So I really appreciate they took the time, and this show is not speeding up. It is not faster and more intense. It is not the classic George Lucas thing. It's taking its time, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that this story is taking its time to progress in a very slow but meaningful way, to give us time to appreciate these characters, appreciate Cassian's journey, but also check in with all the characters. Throughout this episode, I'm like, oh, we haven't heard from Didra in a while. Oh, we haven't heard from Luthen in a while. Like, it was this kind of self-discovery of like, wow, we're checking in all these characters. It still manages to artfully balance all these storylines, but giving this week more heavy emphasis to Cassian and the Rebel story, which I appreciated. So I didn't like it as much as last week's episode. I don't think this is the strongest episode of the season. I think last week's and the weeks before was probably the stronger ones. But I will still say I'll give this one an 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10 from Ben. Din, what about you? Your final thoughts and score out of 10. As serious or jokey as you want it to be.
No, it's 10 out of 10. I mean, I like how I always happen to get on the episodes that it seem to be a little bit controversial in the sense that a lot of people either really love it or really hate it. It's interesting that I was on the one with the eggs,
the Baby Yoda eggs episode,
and I love that because it was at least pushing. It wasn't pushing the nostalgia buttons, it was pushing other buttons, and that's why I like that. And I thought, this bodes well for Star Wars, the fact that those still let people do different things. And there's not much more I can say than what I've said already. I think it's perfect for all those reasons. One thing I will end on is just the fact that I think it is essential authentic Star Wars, and for all the reasons we mentioned, the philosophy, the family issues, all that stuff. But there's a lot, like, I want to just say, support something Ben said about Kessel, which was during the Clone Wars, what George and Dave were trying to say, and this was in one of the special features, that when they study the history of rebellions, what would happen was you would have pockets of people that would start to rebel, and they were completely unorganized. It was just a natural result of a small group of people in their local area rebelling against something that was a tyranny. And so the job of any rebellion is, once you start to see that magic happening, that's the rebel alliance, or any rebellion is just a group of people that come in and organize all the rebellions that are already happening. So when that security bureau lady says, and it's really cool because she's going on a gut feeling, she's saying, oh, I think there's a plan going on here because they're trying to make it look like it's not connected. Well, the truth is that
too random to be random.
Yeah, that was a great line. Yeah, so that's one of those Star Wars lines that's going to stick with us. And another reason why I think this episode is great, because I think it gave us some things that will stick in terms of even catchy dialogue. But the truth is that it could actually just be random things that aren't connected. But the gray area is that there is now this organization, the seeds of the Rebel Alliance that are starting to organize all those separate people together. And that's actually been happening since the Clone Wars. So I don't know. It just makes you think. They could be referring to the one that happened on Kessel that was not planned by the Rebel Alliance. It doesn't really matter.
But even the one that the Ghost Crew did, they weren't working with other rebellions. They were acting on their own. So they weren't really working as with the Alliance. They weren't with the Alliance yet.
Yes. I guess all I'm trying to say is to me, it's bringing up all those ideas that have been in Star Wars, and then especially the Clone Wars when George started to define them more. And I think this is true to the essence of Star Wars for that reason also.
This makes me want to go back and watch Spark of Rebellion again. That episode's so good.
I'm telling you, those Wookiees are so smooth. They look like they
special
carved out
edition
of
that
chocolate.
thing.
They're so smooth.
Yeah, it's the
yes,
the Easter Wookiees.
They were just muddy. They were just very muddy.
Hannah, what about you? Final thoughts, score out of 10 for the Axe Forgets.
Yeah. Well, I do have to say, my approach and mood to this episode has been changed throughout this discussion. I think the composition, the essence and the meaning of this episode is a solid 8.5 out of 10. But my personal opinion of enjoyment and interest is a 6 out of 10. Which on first watch was probably, I'm not even going to lie, probably a 3 out of 10. So I've gone up 3 markers there since this conversation. But yeah, I feel like, but also, again, in transparency, I am totally ready to be completely humbled by this opinion from next week's episode and be like, oh my God, that episode was so good to set all this stuff up what we saw here. I'm totally ready to say that next week. So I think maybe in retrospect, I'll have a different opinion and different score in weeks to come. But yeah, it's good. I'm still very thrilled to keep watching this show.
Right. Hey, totally fair. As we talked about many times through the episode, nobody has to like everything. Not everything's going to be for everybody. And the dream is that there are many lanes and we can all enjoy our lanes and cross over at times and just, it'd be great. Excellent. The sound effects. Hey guys, is that Hannah or is that Hannah or is that Ben Burt on the show? Oh my God.
Sorry. Okay.
Are we suddenly on Coruscant? Whoa! This is really great, man.
So, Chris, before I ask for your thoughts final thoughts and score out of 10 for this episode, I just want to read a comment that we got on last week's episode on YouTube, which is from, I'm just trying to pull it up here really quickly. It's from David Burke, who says, "You ask Chris for a rating and you get a 10-minute dissertation, LOL." So I've got the stopwatch here. Final thoughts and score out of 10. Your time starts now.
But you didn't tell me how long. I don't know what the time is. I don't know how to pace myself. That's a problem. There goes my train of thought.
That was the point.
Yeah. No, I had this whole thing planned and now I forgot what I was going to say.
We're 20 seconds in. You got to go.
I don't know how long I have. It would work. Here's the thing. This is what I'm going to say to respond to what one of the things that Hannah said is I just am assuming that next week episode is going to continue the plot in a way that is predictable because I am aware of the fact that if we had just seen the first 2 episodes of Andor that first night and not 3, we might have had a slightly different opinion of the show out of the gate. Because the first 2 episodes were very much set up for the third. And it seems like they're going through that same pacing here, where the last 2 episodes are really set up for most likely the next episode. So knowing that that's the pacing of the show, I'm not going to really be negative towards the fact that there wasn't this big action set piece or there wasn't this big conclusion to something in the show. So as a result, as a middle episode, I think it did exactly what it needed to do. And so that's perfection for me. It is perfectly executing what you're trying to do. So it's a 10 out of 10 for me because it perfectly executed a setup episode, even better than other setup episodes that I've seen in Star Wars. So this show continues to be perfection for me. I feel like every second of the show is executed as well as I could imagine it being executed, and I don't have any nitpicks with the show yet where I'm like, I would have done this better. They should have done this better. Or this didn't feel completely, this feels a little bit off. Like it's totally great. So the reasons why just simply are because this is a drama and it's being executed very well as a drama. And so, yeah, this is 10 out of 10. This is the best that I feel like can be done given the opportunity.
2 minutes and 22 seconds. Well done.
Oh, wow. Nice. Very terse.
Where, when they ask you, what's your budget, you got to go spend a bunch of money and like buy a printer or something at the end of the year so that they don't decrease your budget. Did I just screw myself by only talking 2 minutes and 22 seconds so that now I only have 2 minutes and 22 seconds?
Yeah, you just did that.
Every single show.
It's like Michael with the debate over the chairs or the copier on The Office.
Also, 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 for the 6-horn sheep.
That was cool.
Yeah, I got to give this one the same score I gave last week's episode, which is 9 out of 10, because I think they continue to be the same quality. I don't know why I'm not giving them 10s out of 10. I love what I'm seeing and I love what we're getting from this show, but I'm also just sort of leaving a little bit of room there to hit the 10 out of 10 and then eventually the 11 out of 10 and the 12 out of 10 and
not going to happen.
On and on like that. So a really great episode, really great character study on all fronts, on the Imperial side with Cyril, on the Rebel side with Cassian and Vel and everybody else, and on and with Mon Mothma and Luthen on Coruscant. Really, really great stuff. So 9 out of 10 from me. Before we completely wrap up the Andor discussion, I've realized I forgot something earlier, and that is our super chats.
Well, I was going to remind you.
Our super duper chats.
After everybody got their final thoughts in.
Yeah. So we'll run through these from Joel. First up, Joel says, I disagree with Chris that the Star Wars formula came after Lucas. In my mind, the Star Wars lane began with Return of the Jedi and the Death Star 2. Like that's one aspect of that movie that otherwise doesn't really adhere to any sort of formula. And again, we were talking about George and his divorce and that sort of thing. The Death Star 2 is as much a function of George's divorce as anything else, because it was just needed a device to wrap up the story. But even the way the Death Stars plays out is, kind of different. It's not another trench run and that sort of thing.
Yeah. As opposed to the Force Awakens Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. Super chat number 2. Been asking this question around, but do you think Andor will give you tonal whiplash going back to The Mandalorian, or will you be ready to go back on the quote unquote Star Wars lane after 12 episodes of Andor?
Here's the thing about Mandalorian is The Mandalorian executes live action Clone Wars the best. The Mandalorian is the closest thing to live action Clone Wars, and Clone Wars balances things better than I think any other show does. So I don't expect to have too much of a whiplash. I think the whiplash is between Andor and Kenobi, and perhaps Andor and Book of Boba Fett. But I feel like Mandalorian is a little bit more zoned in and what it's doing, and its formula is tighter and is kind of better executed. So again, it's really not the tone. It's just like, are they executing the tone well? I can take a tone change as long as it's executed well. When you're listening to a music album, you can have your big ballad songs, and then you can have your sad songs and your slower paced songs and your acoustic songs, and you can have all these different songs, and it's a tonal whiplash. But if they're all good, they're all good. And so what I kind of am concerned with is if the quality of Mandalorian goes down, if the quality of the Mandalorian is at the same level that I think Kenobi is, or Book of Boba Fett was at points, with editing choices, then it's going to be whiplash, quality whiplash. I'm worried about quality whiplash, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Mandalorian is Dave Filoni, Favreau, Johnny, Dave, their baby. I realized they just portmanteaued Dave Filoni's name, and I'm like, how do I? But I think it's their baby, and I think that they're gonna focus really hard to make sure that it's really, really good and it lives up to expectations, because it is like the biggest thing. So I don't think it's gonna have quality whiplash, and the tonal whiplash. I don't really think it's gonna have much, because I will say, to put a cap on that one, that the people that absolutely gutted Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett, I thought they were solid. I didn't hate those two shows. There's some people that absolutely lividly hated those two shows. They like The Mandalorian and they like Andor. And so that shows me that when Mandalorian comes back, it's going to extend that momentum from Andor. Whereas if we were going into a Book of Boba Fett season 2 or a Kenobi season 2, I would get a little bit more worried about how people are going to react to it.
I just have to, because you brought up Kenobi, Chris, I just have to say Kenobi is perfection, and you're all wrong. Fair enough. Anybody else? Any thoughts on tonal whiplash or anything like that? Eddie?
Whip me around. I don't care.
Oh yes.
Also clip that out.
That's also Ben's pitch for a cameo in the next Indiana Jones movie. Yeah, whip me around. It's fine.
Oh, frickin'! There's a whip. There's a frickin' Indiana Jones whip in carbonite in Luthen's shop. That's a thing that I realized a few days ago.
That's cool.
That's freaking crazy.
Ben's Connection Corner Coda.
It extended. This is the post-credit scene of the Ben's Connections Corner.
Yeah. Even the chat thinks it's too revealing there, Ben.
Hey, don't shame me, okay?
All right.
Where's Lumaya when we need her?
Oh, there's a Ben's Connection Corner deep cut.
When are we gonna get lightsaber whips? That's the thing in live action. That's gonna be.
Oh, in live action, yeah. True.
Yeah.
Final super chat here. Joel says, "I'm somewhat with Hannah because if Andor keeps up this quality or even higher quality, I'm going to prefer rewatching Kenobi over this any day." I guess that's just the taste thing that we were talking about. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
You can admire the quality of something and still like something else better.
Joel, we love him, but he did also leave another comment saying A New Hope wasn't that great of a film. So he has some taste choices that he makes.
The Phantom Menace is the most groundbreakingly, incredibly meaningful film in the universe. That's my standpoint.
Wait,
it's pretty great.
Is there sarcasm there or not? I can't tell.
No, I'm being deadly serious. Like, it's the most influential film of all time.
I mean, I
knew you would agree.
I will hold to it that Attack of the Clones is the best Star Wars film. Like 100%. There's no question about it. Attack of the Clones is the best Star Wars film. Like, it's totally it.
I just think A New Hope. I don't disagree with you, Hannah. I just think that George did it a few times. The first time is A New Hope, and that's uncontested.
That's true.
Changed the world like any artist has ever changed the world, if not more than any artist. Like there's like Picasso, George Lucas, whatever, and everyone else. That doesn't even come close. But Phantom Menace, he did it again. He did it again. And we live in that world now. Everyone lives in that world. The MCU lives in that, both of George's worlds.
So good.
And then I think he did it again with the Clone Wars. So yeah,
pretty great stuff.
He should buy Star Wars.
He's got about He's got about 4.05 billion lying around somewhere, doesn't he?
That
should buy Star Wars.
Where Star Wars is now worth $20 billion.
Yeah.
Get that back.
I remember when he sold it. I remember Sam Jackson was like, he got ripped off. It's worth more. And yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
But again, what are you going to do with that extra $1 billion when you already have 4 of them? What are you going to do with it?
It's a good question. Before we wrap things up, before we go, we mentioned Kenobi a couple of times, and Dan, I want to throw things over to you as the Kenobi castaway yourself. You've had a couple of interesting encounters in the last couple of weeks with people who are connected directly and tangentially with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I was wondering if you would share those stories with us.
I feel like it's a lot to tag on after that epic conversation, so I'll try to keep the. I'm working with a limited budget, I guess, like Chris. I'll try to keep myself to it. But yeah, I mean, the biggest one is that I was just walking home, and the little hipster bar that's at the top of my road. It's called Bar.
You never heard of it?
It's amazing. Underground.
Yeah, it's literally not even 5 minutes. Just stopping by the bar, and who's out front? Deborah Chow.
Hey.
Director of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Deborah Chow.
She is my
Toronto's own Deborah Chow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she's my actual neighbor, and she even told me the road she lived on, which yeah, I can't stalk her because I didn't take mental note of the road. I mean, I don't care about that stuff. But it's like one of the, like, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, that famous person lives there. Like, I don't care. But she even told me the road she lived on. I was like, that wasn't smart. I could be a really crazy fan. Well, that was after we talked for about 15 minutes at the bar.
Wow.
It was really great. Yeah, that was I think something that I really wanted to happen, because we ran into her at the Dom invited me with his media passes that he got, his fancy for doing the show and everything. We got to see the Kenobi premiere, and you know all about that. And we had a brief run-in with Deborah, and she signed my poster. But I hadn't seen the last episode yet. So one of the things that was the most important thing to me in all of Star Wars was for Hayden to be redeemed, because I'm the biggest fan of his as an actor. Like, I saw Life as a House before Attack the Clones. I'm like, this kid is awesome. And I have friends that I have a friend, a musician friend, who went to school with him in Markham, and he was the head of their theater group. And everyone was like, everyone just looked up to him as being such a great actor. And they were upset. So local people in the Toronto Markham area were upset because they felt like, actually, I'm just going to say it because I can't really dance around this theme. They were like, George Lucas, like, misdirected and miswrote that guy, because he's so much capable of so much more. And I think he hit it mostly in Revenge of the Sith. I love that. And there's a reason for that. Coppola made him hire his acting coach and blah, blah, blah. To work as an intermediary, because George didn't have the time, you know, all that stuff. But anyway, so I really wanted, after having seen what I consider to be actually, like, the last episode of Kenobi made me realize that Kenobi isn't perfect, but it's pretty emotionally perfect, because I think that Reva's end is the lane. I think that's my one thing, my big thing is that was just too predictable that she'll be redeemed in that Star Wars way. Other than that, it's pretty near perfect to me. But I really wanted to thank her for giving what I think the emotional thing that happened between Hayden and Ewan, because she talks about that in the doc, that they have that in real life. This sort of master and Padawan thing. I actually think that I used to think the Luke and Vader saving each other was the most powerful moment in Star Wars. Single most emotional moment. Then it was challenged by, maybe for some people, Ahsoka leaving the Jedi, the first series finale of the Clone Wars. I think Kanan's death in Rebels is one of them. Like, there's something that they pull off in that scene between Kanan and Hera that gets me every time. But hey, Anakin's always been my favorite character, and Hayden one of my favorite actors. And to see, I think that's the best most intense, emotional, and best acted scene in all of Star Wars. What goes on between Ewan and Hayden in that scene after the fighting? I'm just talking about, like, behind the mask. So I wanted to thank her, and so I did. I'm like, wow. And then she actually said, I do not have permission to say this on the show, but I will, because I believe in what she was trying to do. She said it was really important to both me and Ewan to do right by Hayden and show what a great actor he actually is. And
I'm gonna start crying. This is so beautiful. That is so beautiful.
And she said I had to drive up, like, when I was saying that too. I remember, I don't know if Dom remembers me saying, but I was like, if Ewan's on this project as executive producer and they're going through rewrites, I'm telling you, he loves Hayden. He loves him. Part of the reason is they want to make sure that he's not just self-preservation. He wants Hayden to look good too. And so she even said, yeah, I hope he gets more jobs after this. Like, that he was only 19 and it really hurt him, you know, all that stuff. And I want people to see how good he is. And I was like, you actually did it, because I'm not just saying that. And I don't think she knew how to take it, because I was like, that's the flip side of Luke and Darth saving each other, is the Anakin and Obi-Wan in that scene. Like, it's that good to me. And so, and then after about 15 minutes, the bar owner came out, who I kind of know too, and so I was like, he kind of grabbed her, kind of like in a way that was like, "Are you okay? I'll get you away from this crazy guy," or something. So talking your head off for 15 minutes, and she's like, "No. He was at the premiere," and she was all like, "He was at the premiere, and we're talking Star Wars." It was just really funny. It was like, wow. Is that like jealous boyfriend or something? You know, I'm joking, totally joking.
Wow,
totally joking about that.
That's pretty incredible.
But then the weird thing is that 2 weeks earlier at Fan Expo, because we did a panel there on the DIY Heroes Journey thing, and but one of the days I was walking by the autograph, and I don't care about that stuff either, but I happened to be walking by and I laughed because I saw the two main guys from Clerks just sitting there, like looking really grumpy, like they do at the convenience store, and just bored because no one was in their lines. Dante and the other and
Randall.
Dante and which one's Randall?
Jeff Anderson, I think.
Jeff Anderson, right?
Yeah.
So I went up and I'm like, guys, I'm not an autograph person, and I get nervous meeting famous people, but I really had to tell you how much you just made me laugh, because you look just as annoyed and as bored as you do in the movies right now. And Dante was like, yeah, like Kevin totally typecast us. And then so then I was wearing my Obi-Wan Kenobi shirt from the premiere. So like that's why these two stories go together, because they tie in. And then Jeff Anderson was wearing a Guinness, like Alec Guinness with Kenobi's face. So then Dante was like, "Oh yeah, you're both wearing Obi-Wan Kenobi." So then anyway, so I'm like Jeff, and like I talked to them over 2 days. So at one point I'm like, Jeff, your favorite character is Kenobi. So I'm like, you're an OT guy, right? I'm like, okay, so did you ad lib that scene? Like, are you really like that? Do you really dislike Hayden's performance that much in the prequels and dislike the prequels that much? And he's like, yeah, I'll just say they're not my favorite. And I'm like, have you seen Kenobi? No. I'm like, Jeff, after this weekend, I'm telling you, you're not going to be wasting your time. You have to go watch that movie, because I'm telling you that Hayden is a great actor, and you're going to see him presented great to the fullest of his capabilities. You have to watch that. Yeah, and then so I don't know, it ties in with.
There you go, singing the praises of Hayden Christensen, doing Deborah Chow, helping out Deborah Chow and spreading the good word of Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, so I told Jeff, I'm like, in Clerks 4, you have to do a rant about what a good actor is.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Oh, I love it. And I love just the random celebrity encounter just in your neighborhood of, oh yeah, there's Deborah Chow. It's funny, like, you know, she's the big Star Wars director, and she's from Toronto, but like I just would never imagine that we'd encounter her on the street the way you did, and yet there it is. Yeah, the kind of thing you dream about when you know someone's from the same place.
I have no selfie to prove it, no signature, because I actually didn't want anything to taint the fact that I really wanted her to know. I mean, this. I have to thank
really great.
You have to know you did right. And then she ended up as the thing by like, all right, see you around.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's great. It's like, yes, I will.
Yeah. I know where you live.
Yeah.
I know your road.
Or at the very least, what bar you hang out at.
Yeah. I forgot the road.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Well, on that note, with those two great stories about Hayden Christensen and people connected to him, I think we will begin to wrap things up for this week.
Woo.
All right, that'll conclude this episode of Star Wars Underworld Podcast. We'll be back, same time, same place, with another episode next week. That place is YouTube, and that time is 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. I have no idea what it is now in AEST, Hannah. Have we had time changes?
It's been a time change, so it's now 12:30 p.m. AEST.
That's right. So if you're over there or under there or wherever that is, below there.
Under there? I don't.
Down over yonder. down underworld. If you're over in the down underworld, that is where when you can listen. But same place. YouTube. Search for the Star Wars Underworld. Scroll through the test footage for the Star Wars Underworld show, and then you'll find all of our stuff. We want to thank everybody for watching and listening to the show, and we want to remind everybody at the SWU is where you can find us on social media for more fun throughout the week. Dom, thank you so much for hosting.
It's my pleasure, as always. What a fun discussion. What a fun, interesting discussion. I love it when Star Wars makes us think, and these episodes are certainly doing that. And when an episode can just spin off a discussion like that, that is a quality episode in my books. So absolutely adore talking about this, and cannot wait to talk about next week's episode and the next 6 or 7 episodes after that, because if this is what we're getting from episode 5, who the hell knows what we're going to get from episode 9, 10, 11, 12, and then it'll be a long wait for season 2, but there'll be other stuff to distract us in between then. So yeah, absolute great time. Cannot wait to do all this again in 7 days' time, and let's go Blue Jays.
That's right. That's exciting. I'm rooting for you guys.
What's happening with them?
Playoffs start tomorrow.
Very good. Torontonian. Very good.
Yeah.
At Dominic J25 is where you can follow Dominic freaking out about the MLB playoffs.
Yes.
Ben, thank you for hosting as well.
Oh, this was an absolute pleasure as always. Yeah, it's hard to believe that we're so far into the show, it feels like, but yet we're not even like near halfway through. So really, really incredible. I'm having a lot of fun. I mean, it's always, even when I am not the hugest fan of a TV show, I still enjoy these discussions, and this is probably one of the best ones we've ever had. So thanks to everyone who tuned in, who joined us. This was incredible, and I can't wait to do it in 7 days' time.
Heck yes, at Ben Hart with no E is where you can find him on social media, and where you can harass him over a new, updated, active link to our Discord server each and every week.
You gotta catch me first.
That's right. Catch me outside for that Discord link. How about that?
Wow.
What an old reference, Chris. What a reference.
Apparently. Wow. Dan, it's always a pleasure when we have you on the show. Leads to some great perspective and discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
And plug your music.
Yes, please.
Right. All right. So at F105 Music everywhere. Instagram, SoundCloud. No one uses SoundCloud. Facebook, Twitter, on Spotify. My label always wants to tell me, go to Spotify. Become our 34th monthly listener. Yeah, I really need to promote Spotify more. Yeah, go to Spotify. And F105music.com for upcoming, have something happening maybe that I'm not allowed to announce for Star Wars Celebration. And keep an eye out for that stuff. London.
Yeah.
Love it.
I was hoping to hear from Gentleman Ben, but
but he's bailed. He bailed. Sir Benjamin, the Star Wars gentleman, couldn't stick around for the full outro. The show was too long.
Oh, man. And Hannah, thank you so much for hosting as well. Please let everybody know about what's going on with the Raeside this week or next week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it was a great show this week. I'm glad that we came and we had this discussion today. Over on the Raeside, last week we made some bloodles seen in episode 1 of Andor, which were delicious and very fun. And I'm already masterminding how to make Cyril's cereal for next week on the Raeside. I have somehow become a Star Wars cooking show. Didn't plan for that, but it's just there's too many cool things to eat. Maybe the week after I should do pink milk. This magical pink milk.
That
makes you high after 5 days.
You're fine as long as you don't start sprouting extra arms and screaming stir whip at the camera.
Oh god. The holiday special.
I don't know. Oh, it's been so long. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. But yes.
It's a shame Ben's not around for that. That was Chris's connection corner right there.
At the Raeside is where you can follow Hannah on social media, and that's also the name of her YouTube channel. A few other reminders before the end of the show. Make sure that you punch that subscribe button, Chewy. And we want to thank everybody who super chatted with us, especially Joel. I think he was all the super chats today. Thank you, Joel, and thanks to all our channel members that make this happen. Please harass Ben for that Discord. If you're not over there, that's where you get the link to our exclusive content, like our pre-show that you can be a part of live or watch later. And for anyone that doesn't know, we record that 30 minutes before our regular show. That's where you can find that. Leave that feedback at swunderworld@gmail.com, and please review our show on any podcast apps that you are listening to us. So that's it. We are out of here. We'll be back with another episode in 7 days. But until then, for Ben and Dom and Din and Hannah and all the other fantastic contributors we have here at the Star Wars Underworld, my name is Chris, and may the Force be with you.
So I saw on the Star Wars Instagram that they had like a recipe to make cereal bars out of Cyril's cereal. But they presented the cereal as though it's just something you can buy. And I've never seen corn pops that color. So I still have questions. And I don't know. Hannah, maybe the cooking show can sort those out for me.
Yeah, I've got a team of 30 people working on it right now.
A lot of
Gotta figure out where the hell to get this cereal.
Many Bothans died to get us this information.
Yes.
It's a wrap.